The job is at an immense building in a forgotten corner of the world. Over the last century, the building has been used as a factory, an orphanage, a psychiatric ward, and even a prison. Each time, increasingly horrible things happened to the people in the building, and the landowner gave up trying to repurpose it. However, the area around the land developed rapidly, and the opportunity cost of leaving the land as is became too high. Thus, I was hired to evaluate and renovate the building. The first night after I accepted the job offer and signed the waiver, I walked in and grabbed the clipboard with a list of rules I must follow if I want to keep my life. You know how this goes. Rule 1. Nobody you are interacting with is a living life form. Rule 2. When anyone calls and asks for Fred, you must convince them that Fred is not here. You may tell them anything, but you must never hang up. You are safe once the caller hangs up. Rule 3. Remind the incense man that the morgue is in the basement, but do not show him the way, no matter how much he insists. Rule 4. If you hear a music box start to play, you must locate and close the box before the song ends. Rule 5. If a window opened by itself, toss salt out the window and wait until the hands release before closing it. Then move the wheelchair back to its original spot. Rule 6. When you see them, direct the twins to the experimentation room and tell them the doctor knows best. Smile back. Insert earplugs before the screaming starts. Rule 8. Never, ever speak or write the number of the missing rule. Rule 9. Every night at 9 p.m., mix rat poison with a bowl of dog food and place it out for Fluffy. If Fluffy finishes the whole bowl by 12 a.m., immediately vacate the premises. Rule 10. If you smell smoke, run up to the roof and hide behind the water reservoir tank until it starts to rain. Nowhere else is safe. And do not talk to Martin. Rule 11. Do not look her in the eyes. Though my job was different, there had been contractors who worked in this building because there were generators in the basement that needed to be monitored and maintained. The rules had been passed from one contractor to the next, but I was probably the only person who laughed after reading them. Yes, I laughed. Rules, after all, are made by people who know almost nothing, for people who know even less. Let's say you got this job instead of me. You pocket the sweet advance, and you take in the rules. Every time the phone rings, you rack your brain for the most convincing lies of where Fred could be. He's on leave, he's with a client, he's in Timbuktu with his mistress, and sometimes you even yell until the caller hangs up. But will you ask why that's supposed to protect you? I can tell you. In the early 1930s, Fred was a sensation. He'd spearheaded an innovation that made the factory situated right here generate immense amounts of money and gave hundreds of women jobs. His products were simply divine, like they came from the next era. Everyone wanted at least one of his fancy watches with self-luminous paint. When women began falling dead with radiation poisoning, everyone also wanted answers. Must I remind you that Fred is no longer alive? Your callers are not amongst the living, and you're the one behind this desk now. As for why they're calling, it's because the weakest types of ghosts need directions and an invitation. Let me introduce myself. Properly this time. I am here for a job, but my job is not to follow silly rules made by ignorant humans trying to treat symptoms of a supernatural infestation while surviving to pay the bills. My job is to cleanse the factory and exorcise all the ghosts so my boss can use this land again. Evaluate and renovate, as I said. I started with the easiest task, building a trap for any ghost that wander in looking for Fred. It took almost half an hour to set it up, but I knew any ghost that needed an invitation would be weak and easy to snare. After my setup is complete, I created a new voicemail. Yes, Fred is here. Third room on the second floor. Please visit at your earliest convenience. Then I took a suitcase, went down to an abandoned classroom, and spoke the forbidden word. 7. She emerged from behind some crates, dragging herself along the floor. Her legs were spread out in an unnatural angle behind her, like those of a dead amphibian. Her eyes were little black holes, and she was missing some of her fingers. "Will you play with me?" Her voice was soft, barely audible because of the black yarn pulled through her mouth. Her head, topped with a mess of tangled ginger hair, lolled side to side, and she slowly pulled herself forward towards me. I opened my suitcase. "Will you play with me?" She yelled at me, angry in a way only a child could be. She was suddenly right next to me. With a sudden burst of strength, she reached out for me. "Will you play with me?" I let her feel my hand. Her presence was clammy and wet, as if she'd taken her last breath in a pool. "I'd love to, but I can't play with you." 7. "I'm sorry." The black yarn pulling her lips together began to unravel as her scowl stretched into a grin, before her mouth deformed into something terrible. I added, "He can, though." 7 pulled her hand back. Children, even dead ones, are curious creatures. They're easy to distract and trusting to the point where they appear gullible. She reached for my gift and gasped. Her little body radiated with joy as she ran her hands over the gift I brought her. Light returned to the little black holes that formed her eyes, and she giggled with happiness. I smiled as she read the name on the collar. She hugged her gift. I leaned down. "Would you like to leave with Biscuit so he can play with you forever?" Biscuit was a beloved pet whose body still radiated with spiritual warmth. His owner took him to be cremated, but could not resist handing him over when I offered to pass down words from her dead grandmother in exchange. 7 nodded, her eyes brimming with tears, and her presence began to fade. "You are so nice. Nobody has ever played with me. Nobody has ever been nice to me before." But this is not a tale of how I easily broke all the rules of the building and emerged unscathed. I knew by the time I went down the same flight of stairs 20 times that the last spirit in the building was a powerful one. She was powerful enough to manipulate the world of the living without any invitation. Powerful enough to stay and haunt this ground for centuries. Powerful enough to kill and trap the hundreds here. For once in my life, I felt compelled to follow a rule. Rule 11. Do not look her in the eyes. But I can't. I can't not look her in the eyes because my vision for dead things does not work the same way your eyesight does. Even though my eyelids were firmly screwed over my eyes, I was looking directly in her eyes. Cold washed over me, and I knew she was testing me. How easily could she manipulate my body to shiver? She couldn't. A spirit cannot take from an unwilling human because the rules of life are stronger than the rules of death. But a spirit could manipulate you to give the advantage up. The strongest spirits often knew how to manipulate you until you thought that dying was the best choice you could ever make in your life. She murmured, "Your life is not yours to take," I declared. "You are living on borrowed time," she whispered. "I know what you did that summer." She whispered threats, an auditory invasion of shrieks and wails. Nails dug into the side of my face as she spat out my darkest secrets and laughed at all my insecurities. She'd been here long before I was even born. She'd taken many men and women who were far stronger than me. She reminded me that I'd caused the death of everyone I loved. She reminded me I was destined to suffer alone until I passed my curse on to a willing prodigy. Calmly, I told her, "We know where your body is." The most powerful spirits usually derive their power from where their body had been buried. I cannot explain the rules, but if I moved her body or manipulated the environment of her body, she could find herself trapped in torment forever. She could not take anything from me unless I gave permission. but I could feel her longing. Her existence, even now, tormented her. She wanted to be freed, but she did not want to give up. Whatever happened in her life, she died with so much rage, sorrow, and regret that she was able to sustain her existence for centuries. She was the true source of all the horrible happenings of the building, starting when the land was merely a burial ground. "I have an eternity," she said, because I'd already entered her trap. She could keep me trapped in the never-ending stairwell while preventing me from manipulating her body. My mortal body will perish. "Do you?" I smiled. "Are you sure about that?" You see, I don't just waltz into haunted buildings because I could. I knew dozens of ways to repel ghosts, to reach into the spirit world and tear them apart. I chanted one of the most powerful spells I know. The coldness receded, her presence became less overpowering. Then, one by one, my fingernails popped off. I silenced myself. Her presence sharpened again. A spirit typically cannot take from or harm an unwilling medium, but when I started my chant, I'd willingly established a connection with her. In my decades of dancing with the supernatural, I'd never met a spirit strong enough to resist an exorcism and attack me at the same time. I'd seen plenty of attacks on humans who unwittingly gave permission. There were endless ways you could invite the cursed energy in, but I was trained to resist. Glancing at my bloody fingers, I straightened my shoulder, took a seat on the floor and said, "In eternity, you say? So, how was your day?" My antics caught her off guard. She had an eternity, yes, but we both knew time was of no value to her. I was the last hope for the landowner. If I couldn't exercise his land, the land would simply be sealed off. I'd already sent away the hundreds of souls she'd accumulated over the centuries. Her eternity would become more damned than ever. Her presence stirred, as if she was settling down. We simply existed in the same place, at the same time. My soul was already cursed. She could not trap me here even if she killed me here. She'd simply be alone, and, based on how many victims she collected in the last centuries, she was terrified of being alone. She responded, "I want you to listen to my story." So, she wanted validation and a witness to believe her as she shared the horrible ways her life unfolded before she met her end. A person dies a second time when somebody says their name for the last time. Whoever she was, she'd died so long ago that even my extensive research couldn't unearth her name. Despite how calm I was, I did not have a choice. "I can't do that." Then she hissed, "And after, I want to rip out your tongue." "I will permit nothing else, but I will permit you my tongue. You must promise to leave this world." She began. Her name was Kanawa. Hours later, exactly as the clock struck noon of the next day, I emerged from the large building with blood all over my shirt. True to her words, as she was bound, she left after she finished her life story and ripped out my tongue. Contrary to what you might have thought, being the only person in this world who knew her name, her pains, her deepest secrets, and how unfair her life had been, didn't make her more sympathetic towards me. I don't know if I could have negotiated and gotten away with a less damning injury, but she was certainly too powerful for me to remove by force. I texted the landowner to tell him that his building was now free of ghosts, and I threw the list of rules into the trash. I was starting to feel faint from the loss of blood, but I did take emergency medication for the bleeding, and the ambulance was already on its way. My husband has always talked in his sleep. Nothing creepy at first, just random, half-formed sentences. Stuff about work, grocery lists. Once he sat up and said, "Don't forget the bananas." and then laid back down like nothing happened. It used to make me laugh. About 3 weeks ago, it changed. The first time I woke up around 2:30 in the morning because I heard him whispering. Not mumbling, whispering like he was trying not to be heard. I thought he was awake and on his phone, so I rolled over to tell him to keep it down. He was facing the wall, completely still. Still whispering. I couldn't make out everything, but I heard one sentence clearly. "She's not ready yet." I froze for a second, then nudged his shoulder. He stopped immediately, just silence. When I asked him what he was talking about, he sounded groggy and confused. "I wasn't talking," he said. I brushed it off. People say weird things in their sleep. But it kept happening. Every couple of nights I would wake up to him whispering again, always facing away from me, always too quiet to fully understand. Until last night, I woke up because I felt something. You know that feeling when someone is watching you? Not a sound, not movement, just this heavy awareness. My eyes opened slowly. The room was dark except for a bit of light coming from the hallway. My husband was sitting up in bed. He was facing me this time. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I could tell his eyes were open. "Hey," I whispered. "Are you okay?" He didn't respond. He just kept staring at me. Then he tilted his head slightly, like he was listening to something. And that's when I heard it. A voice. Not his. It was faint, like it was coming from somewhere far away. I couldn't make out where. It wasn't in the room exactly, but it wasn't outside either. It sounded like it was right behind me. I held my breath and listened. "Can she hear me?" The voice was quiet, almost curious. My entire body went cold. I didn't say anything. I didn't move. My husband nodded. Slowly. "Yes," he whispered. My heart started pounding so hard I thought I was going to pass out. I hadn't said a word. The voice spoke again. "Does she know?" He shook his head this time. "No," he said. "Not yet." I couldn't take it anymore. I reached out and grabbed his arm. The second I touched him, he collapsed back onto the pillow like a puppet with its strings cut. Dead asleep. I turned on the lamp so fast I nearly knocked it over. He looked completely normal, breathing steady, eyes closed. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. This morning I asked him if he remembered anything. He laughed it off, said I probably had a nightmare. But here's the part I haven't told him yet. I checked the hallway camera this morning. We have one set up because of a break-in last year. At 2:37 a.m., right around when this happened, the camera recorded something. The hallway light flicked on by itself. And then for about 10 seconds, the audio picked up whispering. It wasn't my husband. It wasn't me. And right before the clip ends, you can hear him clearly from inside the bedroom, answering it. "If she wakes up, you have to leave." When I moved back in with my mother after her hip surgery, I expected a lot of things. I expected the smell of antiseptic. I expected pill bottles all over the kitchen counter. I expected to help her stand up, help her sit down, help her into the shower, and then pretend not to notice how much it humiliated her to need me for any of it. I expected old age to make the house smaller. I didn't expect it to make the house hungry. The first thing I found under her bed was a peach skin. Not a peel, not a pit, just the skin, turned inside out and sucked so clean it looked almost white. I was changing her sheets when I saw it near the wall, flattened in the shadow cast by the bed frame. At first I thought it was tissue paper. Then I crouched, picked it up, and realized what I was holding. "Mom?" I said. "Why is this under your bed?" She was in the chair by the window, a blanket over her knees, looking through one of those mail-order catalogs she never bought from. She didn't even turn her head. "Throw it out." That was it. No embarrassment, no confusion, no attempt to explain it. Just throw it out. Something about that bothered me more than the peach skin itself. I wish I could tell you I knew, right then, that I was in the wrong kind of story, but people normalize disgusting things for a long time before they call them frightening, especially in family. So I threw it out. The next morning I found a used bandage behind her radiator with bite marks in it. That was the first thing that made my stomach really turn. The dressing had come off her hip incision the day before. I knew that because I had changed it myself. Her surgery scar ran along the outside of her thigh. Red, puckered, angry looking, held shut by a row of metal staples that made me queasy if I stared too long. I had wrapped the old gauze in tissue and put it in the bathroom trash. And now there it was, behind the radiator, unwrapped, damp in the center. One corner compressed with blunt little half-moon marks where something had bitten down and pulled. I stood there too long with it in my hand. "Mom?" I said louder this time. "What the hell is this doing in here?" She looked at it, then at me, and I saw something on her face that I misunderstood for another week. Not confusion, not dementia, shame. "I don't know," she said. "This came off your leg, so throw it out." There it was again. That phrase. Not "let me see," not "that's strange," not "how did it get there," just "get rid of it." By then I had only been back in the house 10 days. 10 days of helping her to the bathroom, measuring pills in 2 little plastic cups, washing her hair in the sink because she couldn't stand long enough for a real shower yet. 10 days of hearing her thank me in clipped little bursts like gratitude itself was beneath her. 10 days of sleeping in my old room upstairs and remembering why I had left that house so fast at 18, and then never stayed longer than Christmas after that. My mother has always been a proud woman, but not in the attractive way people romanticize. Not stoic, not dignified. Proud in the mean, impractical way that makes a person insist they're fine while bleeding through a dish towel. So at first I told myself that was all this was. Painkillers, age, embarrassment. Maybe she was hiding food and forgetting it, except the things I kept finding weren't random. They were all soft. Fruit, yogurt, pudding, applesauce, bread crusts gone wet with broth or butter, a banana with tiny, worried bites all the way around it, hidden behind the laundry hamper, a crushed yogurt cup licked clean and tucked under the bed frame, the cap from her cough syrup bottle with teeth marks around the rim, an empty tube of prescription skin cream, flattened from the bottom and torn open at the end. That one bothered me almost as much as the bandage, not because of what it was, because of how it had been used. Not squeezed, not spread, opened and consumed. And always the evidence was low to the ground, under the bed, behind the radiator, between the nightstand and the wall, in the narrow gap beside the laundry hamper. Never on the dresser, never on the bedside table, never in a place that suggested an old woman had simply dropped something and forgotten it. It was all down near the floor, like whatever was taking it didn't want to be seen standing up. That was the point where I started checking her room at night. At first, I did it under a respectable excuse. Water refill, medication check, making sure she hadn't tried to walk to the bathroom alone. Then I stopped pretending to myself. I was searching, under the bed, behind the dresser, the bathroom trash, the laundry basket, inside the nightstand drawers. The room itself began to feel wrong to me in ways I couldn't explain cleanly. It was always warmer than the rest of the house, even with the heat turned down. My mother refused to let me crack the window, even when it smelled stale in there. She insisted on keeping the TV on low through the night, though she always claimed it disturbed her sleep. The sour smell in the room got worse after midnight. Not stronger, exactly. Closer. One night, around 1:30, I woke up because I heard chewing. It came through the floorboards first. A wet, patient sound. Then a pause. Then another. Not loud, not frantic. Not an animal tearing at something. Just chewing. I lay still in bed with my heart hitting hard enough to hurt. Chew. Pause. Chew. Downstairs. I got up and stepped into the hall. The house was black except for the bathroom nightlight on the lower floor, throwing a weak orange strip across the entry hall. As soon as my foot hit the third stair, the chewing stopped. I stood there listening so hard my ears rang. Then I heard my mother's voice. Not calling out, not frightened. Whispering, too soft to catch words. Just that low, private tone people use with shy children, scared dogs, or dying men. I went the rest of the way down the stairs and crossed the hall barefoot. Her bedroom door was open about 2 inches. The lamp inside was off now, but I could see her shape sitting upright on the edge of the bed, facing the far wall. Not the room, not the door. The wall behind the bed. One arm was extended into the dark. For one insane second, I thought she was praying. Then I saw the spoon in her hand. She held it out through a narrow gap between the wardrobe and the wall, and made that same soft, soothing sound again. My entire body went cold. The spoon came back empty. I don't know if I made a sound or if she sensed me there, but she turned her head all at once, and I saw the fear in her face before she arranged it away. "What are you doing?" I asked. She looked at the spoon, then at me. "Nothing." "What are you feeding?" That landed. She did not answer. She did not ask what I meant. She did not act confused. She looked at me the way a child looks at another child who has just kicked over something secret they built together years ago. Then she said very quietly, "Go back to bed." I didn't sleep after that. I sat in the kitchen until morning and listened to the old house settle around me. The pipes, the refrigerator, the little dry clicks from the baseboards cooling. Every sound felt suspect now, not because it was supernatural, but because I no longer knew which sounds belonged to the house and which ones had been hidden inside it all my life. That morning I moved the wardrobe. My mother tried to stop me, not by shouting. That would have been easier. She pushed herself up on her cane and said, "Don't," in a tone so raw and frightened I almost listened. Almost. The wardrobe was heavier than it looked, but old wood drags loud over old hardwood. It came away from the wall with a scream of friction and revealed exactly what some part of me had already begun to dread. A panel, painted over to match the wall, low to the ground, about 2 feet wide with an old finger hole near one edge. And when I touched it, a smell breathed out through the seam. I still don't have the right words for that smell. Hot, damp fabric, old spit, medicine syrup, rotting fruit, skin cream. Human waste scrubbed but never fully erased. The smell of a life lived too near its own mouth. Behind me, my mother said my name once. Just once. In that tired voice mothers use when they know the day has already gone bad and can't be repaired. I opened the panel. There was space behind it. Not much, but more than should have been. A service gap widened over time into something a body could fit through and eventually live in. Blankets, bowls, a flashlight, pill bottles, fruit pits, old magazines, a bucket, a heap of washcloths. a child's plastic plate, a spoon, another spoon, my mother's missing skin cream. And further back in the dimness, a shape, curled, still, breathing. I lifted my phone light. It moved, not like an animal. That would have been a relief. It moved like a person who had been bent to the dimensions of a wall. One hand came first, palm down on the plywood, fingers splayed too carefully, then a shoulder, then a head tilting into the light. I saw the hands before I saw the face properly, and that made it worse. They were hands, chapped, narrow, bitten at the nails. One wrist healed crooked years ago and left that way. Not claws, not paws, not anything I could exile into another species. When the face lifted, what hit me wasn't monstrosity, it was intimacy. The shirt it wore had once been one of my father's undershirts, cut down and resewn badly at the collar. The hair had been hacked short in uneven chunks. Ointment shone in a dull smear along one side of the neck where the skin had cracked. One side of the mouth hung wetter than the other. The eyes had that dim house look. Not blind, just adapted to poor light. And behind all of that, horribly intact, was recognition. It looked at me like it knew me. Then my mother said from behind me, "That's your brother." The room tilted. No. That was all I had at first. No. She was crying now, but quietly, almost irritably, as if tears were one more indignity to manage. "His name is Noah." "I don't have a brother." "Yes," she said. "You do." The thing in the wall, Noah, made a low sound then. Not a growl, not a moan. More like a hurt little murmur caught in the throat. My mother turned toward him instantly. "It's all right," she said. "It's all right, sweetheart." Sweetheart. That did more damage than the wall did, because a hidden thing in a crawlspace can still be filed under horror if you push hard enough. A mother soothing it with love pushes it somewhere worse. "What is he?" I said. Her face changed, not because she didn't understand the question, because she hated that I had asked it that way. "He's your brother." "What is he doing in the wall?" This time she closed her eyes before answering. "Your father wouldn't let them take him." That was the first clean shape of the truth. Not the whole truth, just enough of it to kill off every easier possibility. My father had been the kind of man who believed privacy could solve any shame if you enforced it hard enough. He kept ugly things behind closed doors, broken furniture in the basement, money problems in his desk drawer, tears in bedrooms, questions in children. I had never once imagined that his idea of privacy extended to a human being. But once the possibility existed, memory started moving. Not full scenes, fragments. His rule about scraping plates clean and taking food trash outside every night. His fury if I knocked on my mother's bedroom door after 10. The utility cabinet nailed shut when I was 8 because the pipes shifted. The reason my bedroom door always had to stay open at night. The sounds in the wall explained away as mice, old plumbing, raccoons under the eaves. "You knew enough when you were little," my mother said. I stared at her. "What does that mean?" "You used to leave him food." The room got very small. "No." "You did." "For what?" She looked at the opening. "Because you heard him crying." And just like that, something came back. Not story, not even language. Just a child's gesture. A paper towel folded around sandwich crusts. my hand sliding it across the kitchen floor toward the laundry door. A pause, a wet little sound from the other side, then running away before I had to think about what I had done. I put one hand on the wall to steady myself. Noah was still watching me from the dark. Not with hunger, not with aggression, with a kind of fearful expectation I still don't have a clean word for. "How long?" I asked. My mother gave the answer after less than a second. "Your whole life." I called Adult Protective Services that morning. Then I called the sheriff's office. I wish I could make that part dramatic, but horror rarely becomes less degrading when other people arrive. It just gets fluorescent. A deputy, a county social worker, an EMT, then more people after they saw the wall. Noah did not come out easily. He recoiled from strangers and made those same low, broken sounds every time they came too close. He bit one medic hard enough to send blood down the man's wrist. My mother screamed then, really screamed, tried to stand, nearly fell. The social worker kept saying her name over and over in that careful, professional voice that means I am trying very hard not to make this uglier in front of me than it already is. And through all of it, Noah kept looking for her. That was the worst part. Not the smell, not the wall, not the years of bowls and bandages and damp little hidden scavenged things. The worst part was that he kept looking for her, not because she had hidden him, because she was still his mother. When they finally got him onto a stretcher and wheeled him out through the hall, he turned his head and found me immediately. And with a voice so ruined it barely counted as one, he said my name. Not Evan, the little nickname only my family used when I was a kid. That was when I understood the last part I'd been trying not to understand. He didn't just know me now. He had known me then. My mother never forgave me. Before they moved her to a rehab facility, she said exactly one thing that still wakes me up at some nights. Don't make him feel unwanted again. Again. That word did more damage than anything else. Again means there had been a first time. Again means some child version of me had done enough to hurt him that my mother still carried it. Again means I did not grow up outside this secret. I grew up shaping around it. I cleaned out the house alone that summer. Once you know what a house has really been used for, every object in it turns witness. The extra canned peaches in the pantry, the duplicate ointment purchases in old pharmacy bags, the baby monitor with tape over the speaker light, the cut-down undershirts in my mother's bottom drawer, the washcloths hidden behind the water heater, the scratch marks on the inside of the wall panel, the stack of children's books in the crawl space with the corners chewed off, and in a shoebox behind my mother's winter clothes. One Polaroid. 2 boys on a kitchen floor. Me, maybe 7. The other one smaller, thinner, turned toward me. Not a creature, not a shame, just a child. My brother. I sold the house in August. That sounds cleaner than it felt. On paper, the hidden wall space had been reported, opened, documented, sanitized, and sealed. The county had done what counties do. Correct the structure, filed the forms, converted horror into compliance. Paper means nothing. I moved back into my apartment and tried to resume my life. For a while, I almost believed I had. Then one Sunday, I bought peaches. I set 4 of them in a bowl on the kitchen counter, took a shower, and came back to find 3. I stood there dripping onto the tile, staring at the bowl. Maybe I had miscounted. Maybe one had rolled. Maybe I was already worse than I thought. Then I heard the sound from the hall closet. My water heater is in there. Old building. Pipes click and knock sometimes. That wasn't it. It was soft, wet, chewing. I did not move. I stood there barefoot and half-dressed, staring at the low-veered closet door, while the sound went on for maybe 5 seconds. Maybe 20. Long enough for my entire body to understand it before my mind did. Then it stopped. A second later, something tapped once against the inside of the door. Not scratching, not banging, just one careful tap, like it knew I was there and didn't want to startle me. And then from behind the slats, I heard a voice try my childhood nickname again. Not cleanly, not fully, but close enough. Close enough that my knees nearly folded. I don't buy peaches anymore. I don't leave food in the sink overnight. I don't shut my bedroom door all the way. And every few nights, no matter how much I tell myself I'm imagining it, I still wake up listening for the sound of somebody chewing in the walls of a place I thought was finally mine. The worst part is not that I hear it sometimes. The worst part is that part of me still listens for whether it sounds hungry. I work at a funeral home in a small town on the Washington coast called Gravesend, and I can't keep it to myself anymore. This place is different. Not in the way people usually mean when they say haunted or creepy, but in a quieter, stranger way that settles under your skin if you spend too much time here. Things happen at this funeral home that don't make sense. It was small things at first, like a misplaced file, an odd sound in the preparation room, or flowers arranged differently than I remembered. Then there's the bigger things that make me question whether the dead are actually staying where we put them. I've started writing these stories down. Maybe it's to keep track before I forget, or maybe it's to prove that I'm not imagining it at all. If you haven't heard of Gravesend, that's normal. Most people haven't. The town sits on a thin stretch of land between the ocean and the ocean cliffside where the highway eventually runs out and turns to gravel. If you keep driving past that point long enough, the road narrows, the fog gets thicker, and eventually you are here whether you meant to be or not. The funeral home sits at the very edge of town, which is fitting, I guess. Most people only end up there once. People imagine funeral homes are unsettling places, but the truth is they're usually very calm. The dead don't cause problems. The living do that well enough on their own. I started working here just 3 years ago after moving back to my hometown, and sometimes I think about my old roommate, Elsie, back in my college dorm building, daring me to see what was behind locked doors and forgotten rooms. I laugh now because the only doors I open are to preparation rooms and mausoleum crypts, and the things I find are far stranger than anything she could have imagined. My boss, Martin, has owned the place for decades, and mostly lets me handle the day-to-day stuff like the paperwork and preparation room, and whatever other odd jobs need doing when families aren't around. It's quiet, predictable work, save for the few odd things here and there. A fog rolled in early that afternoon, the kind that drifts all the way up the cliffside from the water and settles over the town until the streets look like they're fading into nothing about 50 yards ahead of you. By sunset, the whole place felt muted and gray, like the world had been wrapped in cotton. The body arrived just after sunset, a man in his late 50s who died in the hospital about 20 miles inland. The hearse pulled in just after 7. I stepped outside to help unload the body bag, the damp air carrying that familiar smell of salt and wet leaves from the forest behind the building. The driver handed me the paperwork while we wheeled the stretcher inside, through the preparation room doors. Heart attack, according to the paperwork. That part wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the name because I recognized it immediately. The pen stopped moving in my hand. You see, Gravesend is a small enough town that you eventually learn most of the names that come through the doors, and some of them stick with you longer than others. especially when you're the one who helped bury them. The man's name was Daniel Crow, and just last year I stood beside the grave when Daniel was lowered into the ground. I remember it clearly because it was my first funeral that I had a small hand in arranging, and it rained the entire time. Cold, steady rain that soaked through my coat while the priest rushed through the service and the family huddled under umbrellas that kept turning inside out with the wind. I remember the coffin with its dark wood and brass handles, heavy enough that the pallbearers nearly slipped on the wet grass. And I remember standing beside Martin, watching the lid disappear beneath the edge of the grave. So when I saw the name on the paperwork, my first instinct was that there had to be some kind of mistake. Gravesend isn't large, but coincidences aren't impossible. Most of the time when a family name appears on a death certificate, it belongs to someone you've seen around town for years. A neighbor, a former teacher, the owner of the grocery store you've been shopping at since childhood. But the odds of two men with the same name, the exact same birth date, and the exact same hometown both ending up on our preparation table seemed unlikely enough that my stomach began to tighten almost immediately. Still, paperwork gets mixed up. Hospitals make clerical errors. It wouldn't have been the strangest administrative mistake I'd ever seen. I stood there for a while looking at him. He looked ordinary, pale, still, and a little thinner than I remembered. Maybe. But time does that. Eventually I went upstairs to check our files. We keep physical records going back almost 50 years in a narrow room behind the chapel. It took me about 10 minutes of sifting through the dusty binders and yellowing paperwork to find it. Crow Daniel. A year ago, buried at North Briar Cemetery, plot C14. Everything was in order: his death certificate, service documentation, burial permit. I carried the folder downstairs to Martin, and he read through it slowly while I stood beside him, trying not to let my hands tremble. He glanced up at the body on the preparation table and finally said in his usual calm, measured voice, "I thought he looked familiar." "You remember him?" I asked. "That was the rainy service," he replied. I swallowed hard. I checked the records. He was buried in Section C last year. Martin rubbed his forehead. "Maybe the family moved him." I offered, hoping for the mundane explanation to be true. "No request ever came through here," he said. We went through with the viewing as scheduled. The family didn't seem to notice anything out of the ordinary, though I caught myself glancing at the urns and caskets as if one might suddenly vanish before my eyes. And when the burial came, the rain had started again, heavy and gray. The grave chosen for Daniel Crow lay in Section C, and I instinctively knew where his original grave was, only 20 feet away. My heart thudded as we approached, the fresh soil dark against the green grass. The headstone from a year ago stood silently, granite slick with water, and the engraving was exactly as I remembered: Daniel Crow. I tried not to focus on it, on the fact that it looked untouched, exactly as it had been when we first buried him. The pallbearers lowered the coffin into the new grave while the priest murmured the short service, and I felt an irrational sense of wrongness settle over me, like watching a duplicate layer of reality overlap the one I had accepted. After the family left, when the fog had thickened and the cemetery gates had closed, Martin suggested we check the original grave. I followed him through the mist, the path barely visible, the trees looming overhead. Digging was slow work, the soil soft but tangled with roots and stones. My fingers ached, but worse was the creeping sense that the night was watching, that some quiet awareness in the town itself had noticed our intrusion. When the coffin surfaced, I saw what I had feared. Empty. No body, no clothes, no bones. Only a thin layer of soil that had fallen through the seams, disturbed by nothing we had done. The faint scent of earth and decay and the sound of rain on the trees filled the silence around us. Martin leaned on his shovel and let the lid fall back into place. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Finally, he looked toward the freshly dug-up grave, then to the fresh grave from earlier in the day and mumbled, "Well, I suppose we'll find out soon enough." I shivered, wet and cold, thinking not just about the body but of everything I'd come to notice about Gravesend in the years since returning. The fog that settles over town and seems to hide more than just the ocean of the cliffside. The quiet insistence of the town that some things remained undisturbed. The subtle way residents always seem to know more than they say. "Find out what?" I asked. Martin's gaze lingered on the new grave. "Whether he plans on staying put this time," he said. I stood there feeling the weight of it, the creeping certainty that Gravesend has rules, and even when you follow them perfectly, the dead might still have their own plans. And I thought back briefly of Elsie at my old college apartment and how she used to dare me to explore abandoned places with her. Somehow, being here in the fog, surrounded by graves, I realized Gravesend itself was the kind of place even she wouldn't have dared to enter. I don't know what's happening here, or why some of the dead don't stay buried, but I do know that I can't ignore it anymore. Every day the funeral home brings something new, something that doesn't fit with what we understand about death and burial. I'm just trying to make sense of what's happening here in Gravesend, and maybe writing it down will keep me safe, or at least sane. Either way, I'll keep writing down my stories and sharing the strange things that happen behind the doors of this funeral home, at the edge of the world. I grew up without siblings. Back then it was just me, my mom, and my dad in our home in the rural area around Detroit. My parents always tried their best to give me every opportunity, even though money was tight, and they did a pretty good job. I'm now the owner and founder of a fairly successful construction company, living my best life with my beautiful wife and our 2 daughters in a 2-story home. My father passed away a few years ago, so my mother had been living alone in the house where I grew up. As she got older, she began having more and more difficulty taking care of everything by herself. Since I couldn't always be there to help her, I finally convinced her to sell the house and move into a beautiful, highly rated retirement home in East Detroit. I thought I had made the right decision. Professionals could take care of her, and I could focus on my business and my family. But the day she moved in, her health began to decline rapidly. I started receiving calls from the nurses and doctors almost every week. They told me her mental state was worsening, that she refused to eat or take her medication. But the worst part, the part that made my stomach turn, was what they told me about her nights. Every morning, they didn't find her in her bed. They found her sitting inside her closet, awake, shaking, crying. When they asked her why she kept doing that, she always refused to answer. She would just tell them to leave her alone. So I went to visit her. When I asked her directly why she was getting into the closet every night, she looked at me with tears in her eyes and said my father wouldn't have wanted me to put her there, that she wanted to go back to her old house. Then she broke down crying and told me to leave. On the drive back, my thoughts were racing. One idea kept forcing its way to the front. What if the staff was mistreating her? It would explain everything. Her fear, her silence. So I did something I thought was justified at the time. I stopped at a Walmart and bought a baby monitor. Later that evening, while my mother was having dinner, I slipped into her apartment and set it up in the corner of her bedroom, aimed directly at her bed. Then I left, went home, had dinner with my family, and tried to get some work done. Around 9 p.m. I checked the monitor. Everything seemed normal. My mother got into bed, turned off the light, and went to sleep. Nothing unusual. I left the feed running in the background. About 2 hours later, something changed. My mother suddenly jolted awake. She didn't move at first, just lay there staring at the door, completely still. Then, without warning, she sprang out of bed. Not like someone waking up like someone was forcing her. She rushed to the closet, climbed inside, and slammed it shut. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. After a few seconds, I grabbed my keys and drove. The streets were empty. I got there fast. When I entered the building, the reception desk was empty. No staff in sight. I ran to her apartment, unlocked the door, and rushed straight into her bedroom. Then I went to the closet. I opened it. There she was, curled up, shaking and crying. I asked her what was going on, what she was doing, why she was acting like this. She slowly raised her hand and pointed behind me to the bed. Only then I saw the pale and hairless humanoid creature sitting on her bed, looking at us. I didn't plan on becoming a diver. Not really. It was one of those things you fall into because the thing you actually wanted doesn't fall back, no matter how long you wait for it. I kept thinking something would open up eventually, something closer to what I studied, but nothing ever did. I wanted to cook, a real kitchen, the kind where everything is loud and hot and fast, where people shout your name like it matters. I studied for it, finished the course, even got good enough that my instructors told me I had a chance if I stuck with it. But chance doesn't pay rent, and restaurants don't hire people who don't already know what they're doing. Every place I applied to wanted experience. Experience needed a job needed experience. It loops like that until you either get lucky or give up. Bills don't wait for either. So I took what I could get, something steady, something that didn't ask too many questions. It wasn't what I imagined doing with my life, but it paid enough and it came with training, and what I got was underwater maintenance. I'm telling you, it's not that bad. That's what Rico said my first week. We were sitting on the edge of the dock with our legs hanging over water that looked darker than it should have been, even in daylight. It smelled like rust and fuel, like something that never really washed away no matter how often the tide came in. "You just clean?" I asked. "Yeah." "That's it?" "That's it." He said it like it was obvious, like I was overthinking something simple. I looked down at the water again, watching the way it barely moved. Just small ripples tapping against the wood. "Under there?" I said. Rico shrugged. "Where else are the barnacles gonna be?" The job sounds simple when people explain it. Hole cleaning, that's the official term. You scrape off barnacles, algae, and whatever else decides a ship is a good place to stay. It keeps the vessel moving efficiently, reduces drag, saves fuel, all that technical stuff that matters to people who never have to actually go down there. But no one tells you what it feels like to be under something that big. The first time I went down, I genuinely thought the ship was going to fall on me. I know that doesn't make sense. It's buoyant. It's supported by the water, by physics that doesn't suddenly stop working because you're underneath it. But none of that matters when you're there, looking up at something that stretches farther than your light can reach. It doesn't feel like it's floating. It feels like it's hanging. And the longer you stay under it, the more it starts to feel like it's just waiting. "You'll get used to it," Rico said through the comms during that first dive. "I'm not used to it," I said. "You're alive, right?" "Yeah." "Then you're getting used to it." The early jobs were easy. Dock work mostly. Shallow water, murky but manageable, with enough light filtering through that you never felt completely cut off. You always had a line, always had a clear path back up, always knew where you were. You scrape, you move, you come back up. Routine. Routine matters more than people think in this kind of work. When everything around you is dark and unfamiliar, it's the only thing that keeps your head from drifting somewhere it shouldn't. You hold on to it because it's the only part that still feels normal. It keeps you grounded when nothing else does. About 3 months in, I got my first open water assignment. It was a cargo ship, big enough that it didn't make sense to bring it into port just for cleaning. It stayed anchored offshore, far enough that the water changed color before you even reached it. "Why not just dock it?" I asked. Rico laughed. "You know how much that costs?" "No." "Exactly." The captain's name was Alvarez. He didn't look like a captain, not in the way you expect. No uniform, no polished shoes. Just a worn shirt and a face that looked like it had spent years staring into sunlight and squinting through problems. "You the new guy?" he asked. "Yeah." He looked at me for a second longer than necessary, like he was checking for something specific. "You panic?" "No." "You lie?" I hesitated. He smiled just a little. "Good. Means you think first." The water out there was different. It wasn't just darker in color, like the light couldn't reach as far. It felt heavier somehow, like it had weight to it. The kind of weight you don't notice until you're already inside it, and by then it's too late to compare it to anything else. "You'll be fine," Rico said while checking my gear. "Same as always, just deeper." "How deep?" 40 meters, give or take." "That's not same as always." He tightened one of the straps and tapped the tank. "Relax, you've trained for worse." "Training's not real," I said. "Neither is panic," he replied, "until you make it real." The first descent felt normal enough. Cold hit first, then pressure, then that narrowing of vision as your world shrinks down to whatever your light touches. I kept my breathing steady. In, out, in, out. "Comms check," Alvarez said. "Loud and clear." "You reached the hull yet?" "Almost." The ship didn't appear all at once. It never does. It starts as a shape, then a shadow, then something that blocks out the little light you had left. Then suddenly it's just there. Steel, endless and quiet. "Jesus," I muttered. "Big, right?" Rico said. "Doesn't feel real." "It is. Start on the port side." I turned on the scraper and pressed it against the hull. The vibration traveled up my arm, familiar enough to settle me. Barnacles cracked away in clusters, breaking loose like they always do. That part felt normal. Time passes differently when you're down there. You don't have much to measure it by. No real sense of change beyond your own breathing and the steady rhythm of your work. After a while, it stops feeling like time at all and starts feeling like you've just been there longer than you should be. "How's it looking?" Alvarez asked. "Standard build-up," I said. "Nothing unusual." There was nothing unusual about it. At least, that's what I told them when they asked, and what I told myself while I kept working. It stayed that way long enough for me to believe it. Then I saw the first patch. Small, clean, too clean. "Did someone start this already?" I asked. "No," Rico said. "You're first down there." I ran my glove over it. It wasn't scraped. It didn't have the roughness you expect from metal that's been cleaned. It felt worn. "It's probably current," Rico said. "Water hits certain angles harder." It made sense. The explanation fit cleanly, like something I could hold on to if I didn't think too hard about it, but it didn't feel right when I was actually there touching it. I moved on anyway. That's the thing about this job. You learn to ignore what doesn't fit as long as it doesn't stop you from working. Then I heard something. Not loud, not clear, just enough to notice. "Did you hear that?" I asked. "Hear what?" I listened again. Nothing. "Don't chase sounds," Alvarez said. So I didn't. But I started noticing more. The barnacles weren't random anymore. Some of them formed lines, loose patterns that didn't feel accidental. The clean patches appeared more often, spaced out like gaps between something I couldn't quite see. It didn't feel empty down there. I've been in dark water before, and there's a difference between empty space and something that just looks empty. This felt like the second one, like something was there even if I couldn't see it. I kept working anyway. Routine. That's what I told myself. Until I found the marks. They were larger than the patches, deeper than anything that should have been caused by current or debris. They looked like something had pressed against the hull over and over again, leaving shapes that didn't quite match anything I knew. "Pull back," Alvarez said. I did, and for a second I thought they moved. I told myself they didn't. I told myself a lot of things. When I came back up, I didn't argue when they told me to go down again, because part of me already knew something was wrong. The second dive is worse. You don't have curiosity anymore, just awareness. You know what you saw, and you know you're going back to it. I dropped again. Cold, pressure, dark. The hole came back into view and so did the patches. "Do the section you skipped," Alvarez said. I didn't want to, but I did. The scraper didn't catch on it. It slid like there was nothing there to move. Then something tapped from the other side. Not loud, not aggressive, just there. I froze. "That's not possible," Alvarez said. But it happened again. I touched the surface again, but this time it didn't feel like metal. It felt like something in between. I told myself it was residue. I told myself it was anything else. Then I found the part that was peeling. Layers lifting like something underneath was pushing outward. I touched it. It bent too easily. And underneath, there wasn't just darkness. There was depth. I leaned closer, and for a moment something inside shifted. I didn't understand what I saw. I don't think I was meant to. "There's something in there," I said. "Come back up," Alvarez replied immediately. This time I didn't hesitate. I turned and grabbed the line. Halfway up it went tight. Not tangled, not caught. Held. I didn't move after that. Not because I was told to, but because something in me just locked up completely. It felt like moving would mean acknowledging something I wasn't ready to understand yet. "Cut the line," I said. They argued. Then they didn't. The tension vanished and I went up fast. Too fast. Something followed. It didn't rush or panic. It didn't move like it needed to catch me. It just stayed behind me at the same distance, like it already knew I wasn't getting away. I didn't look back on the way up. Every part of me wanted to, just to confirm what I already felt was there. But I knew that would make it worse. Some things are easier to deal with when you don't give them a shape. When I surfaced, I told them the truth. "It wasn't stuck," I said. "Something was holding it." They didn't argue. That was the worst part. We left after that. I quit 2 days later. I didn't give a reason. They didn't ask for one. It should have ended there. It didn't. Last week I saw the ship again. Docked. Clean. Too clean. I walked closer before I realized I was doing it. Something about it pulled me in like unfinished business I didn't want but couldn't ignore. I looked over the edge. The patches were still there. More of them now. Spaced out. Deliberate, like gaps, or space. And as I stared, one of them shifted slightly. Just enough to notice. Just enough to understand. I left immediately. I haven't gone near open water since. But sometimes at night, when everything is quiet, I still hear it. Not tapping, not knocking, just there. At the edge of hearing. Like it's still holding on to something. A thought. that the ocean is not empty as it seems. If you're reading this while sitting on a train, do me a favor. Put your phone down for a second and tell me what it smells like around you. If it smells like an old rotten rag from some damp basement, read this. My coworkers, my friends, even my own kids. Nobody's listening. Especially my youngest daughter. She's dead certain I'm just a cranky old geezer with a case of job brain. Jokes that I've got early onset senility, and tells me it's time to see a shrink or just pack it in and head to the nursing home. Look, I'm barely in my 50s, and I'm sure not ready for the rocking chair yet. Well, my gut has almost never steered me wrong, and right now, my gut is screaming. That's why I'm writing this before I leave. My job is to warn you. After that, do what you want. You've seen this new subculture, or whatever the hell they're calling it lately, right? The one spreading through the city like a rash. Look at them. I mean, really look at these kids. Let me explain. See, I work security for the subway, standing by the turnstiles, watching the scanners bark and seeing the same tired faces. My job is to keep an eye on the gates, making sure nobody hopped the turnstiles or brought anything through that didn't belong. It was only supposed to be a temporary job, something to ride out the crisis, but I just stayed. The time at the gate is only one part of my routine. We rotate. 1 hour you're on the frisk. Then you head to the back room to go blind staring at a grid of 30 cameras. Then you're out on patrol. Back and forth, pounding the pavement. Whole day on your feet. By the time I get home, my soles are throbbing like a train ran over 'em. I've even got a ritual. Get home, first thing I do is shove my feet into a bucket of ice water. Without that, you ain't standing up the next morning. I buy expensive boots. I shove orthotic insoles in there. Never cheap out on that. But don't mind my whining. The pay is decent enough. I'm not gonna buy a gold toilet or something. But it covers life in this meat grinder. I even took my wife on a real vacation every year. She would have believed me. Or at least she'd have listened. She always listened. I still carry her old Polaroid around. She's always with me, even though she's been gone for many years. Nancy is watching me from above, keeping me safe. I know it. Anyway, I'm rambling again. Point is, there are perks to being stuck underground. You find them after a while, like the sounds and the smells that used to drive me nuts. I grew to love them. That cocktail of creosote and ozone, hot metal and the human soup. Cigarettes, sweat, perfume, cheap food, and all the rest. I learned to love the stink, even if I don't notice it much anymore. And I like people watching when I'm in the mood. Keeps me from dying of boredom. And hey, it's part of the job, noticing the little things. Like predators, I can spot them from a mile away. They try to blend in, acting casual, but I see what they're up to. I see the way they eye someone's bag, their pockets, or how tight a person is clutching their phone. They're looking for the soft spots. The office drones, too. They're exhausted, shoulders slumped, all wearing the same drab rags. Always in a rush. Their bosses, though? They've always got better shoes and this calmer air about them. They look at me like I'm a piece of furniture. If they look at all. Tourists and locals, I snap 'em like twigs. Especially, I like watching the kids. Even if I don't get 'em half the time. The fashion is weird, sure. I've watched the clothes and the hair change for years, but some things stay the same. They want to rebel, to show they're different. They think they won't be standing here 20 years from now with a bad back and shot legs. God willing, kid. God willing. The most consistent thing is seeing the little groups. You see a pair and you know, yep, those two are in love. You can tell instantly. It's like the crowd and the stinking subway just vanish for them. Anyway, enough of the sappy stuff. I just wanted you to understand that I've been looking at crowds for 23 years. Every day. I know how to spot details, even the tiny ones. Usually it's all quiet. Most people are just buried in their phones, business as usual. But about 3 weeks ago, this kid caught my eye. Walked alone, I clocked him immediately, mostly because of his threads. He was one of those alt types. Plenty of them around, but this kid, he looked like he'd fought a dumpster for his hoodie and lost. Filthy, covered in stains. Who knows what color it used to be? Gray, maybe. Hood up, greasy, matted hair sticking out. Hands buried in his pockets. A junkie, I figured. Dead ringer. His eyes were pitch black. Full-on sclera lenses covering the whites. Face was pale as a ghost, covered in these bumpy piercings. I remember giving my youngest, Laura, hell for that kind of crap when she was little. Glad my girl grew out of that phase. Anyway, I marked the kid but didn't stop him. You see plenty of weirdos down here. Jump on every one of them and you're fast-tracking your own pink slip. When he hit the gate, I made my move. Just a casual stroll, like I'm doing my rounds. No bag on him, and his look wasn't like the usual threats I've seen. He was calm. Too calm. Walking steady. Straight. As he passed, I took a sniff. None of that typical junky chemical funk. It was more like a basement smell, like the cellar at my cabin. Damp, moldy, with a hint of a dead rat somewhere under the floorboards. Pure rot. Garbage notes, too. Spoiled food. But here's the thing. The hair on the back of my neck stood straight up when he went by. No idea why. Kid passed. I tracked him on the cams. Sat down, rode his stop, got off. Normal. No incidents. I probably wouldn't have given him a second thought if he was the only one. The second one, I remember her like it was this morning. Next day, early shift. She was wearing an office suit that didn't fit her rebel vibe, or those black scleras at all. She walked straight, looking straight ahead. Didn't glance at the crowd, just a steady, focused glare. No bag, no deep pockets. On her white blouse, there was this weird yellowish stain, like someone had puked a long time ago and tried to wipe it off. She was clutching a wilted rose with both hands. Her nails were incredibly long, probably manicured, grayish black. And that same trail followed her. I thought right then, are she and that kid hanging out in the same stinking basement? They were too similar to be a coincidence. And get this. When she was close, I started breaking down her perfume in my head. Rot, trash, dampness. And then that one note. My son has this stinking bizarre cologne. He calls it niche. Says I wouldn't understand. He spends half a paycheck on that crap. The perfume was called something stupid like Corpus Fluid Zero or whatever. You know the stuff. Smells like spit, urine and milk, and all kinds of weird animal business. That's how she smelled. Like she'd climbed out of a cellar, dug through a dumpster, and then doused herself in that stuff. And no, it wasn't your regular homeless combo. It was really something else. Anyway, I couldn't let her pass. "You okay, miss?" I said, stepping into her path. She stopped and looked me in the eyes. God, I felt it then. Every hair on my body stood up. Every molecule was screaming at me to run. Just run. But I've been doing this a long time. I'm the law here. It's my duty. So I kept my cool and braced myself. The girl smiled, but just with her lips. A smile like she was wearing braces or something. She didn't answer. She just stood there staring at me and smiling. Marcus was on shift with me. He's a cop, and he stepped up immediately to see why I'd stopped her. Miss? Officer Marcus, Transit Police. Oh, how happy I was when Marcus caught the vibe and moved in. My colleague here has a question. Are you alright? Do you know where you are? The girl just kept standing there, smiling. Now she was drilling her eyes into Marcus. I had a good look at her then. Filthy blonde hair. Hadn't seen a shower in a long time. That stench she was wrapped in killed any appetite I had for lunch. And those weird bumps on her pale skin. I thought it was piercing work or something, because they were all the same size and perfectly round. Not acnes, but bumps under her skin. Miss, I'm gonna need to see some ID. Marcus was already tapping something on his tablet. She pulled out a card. The plastic was chewed to hell, stained and yellowed. Marcus took it with 2 fingers, looking disgusted, and started punching it into his device. She just stood there, staring at him, clutching that rose in one hand while twirling a greasy lock of hair with the other. I saw Marcus's face twitch. A shiver. Seems everything's in order, miss. Sorry for the trouble. Have a good day. She took her card back and shoved it into the pocket of her filthy, dusty, crumpled skirt. I was surprised, to say the least. She just started walking toward the escalator, steady, confident pace. I was a one giant goosebump with no reason, but at the same time I felt sorry for her. Even though my jaw was aching the whole time she was near me, I figured she was just some kid in a bad spot who needed help. I thought that right up until she stopped before stepping onto the escalator. She looked back at me one more time before vanishing into the crowd, and gave me this wide, wide smile. Those weren't braces. Not braces. It was several rows of sharp teeth, like a shark's, sticking out like jagged cliffs. I thought for sure I'd gone crazy right then, but Marcus saw it too. He was standing there, pale as a sheet. Said that formally everything was fine. ID checked out, but he felt exactly what I felt. That overwhelming urge to drop everything and run as far as his legs would carry him, and an urge to let her go. The cameras showed everything was fine. She got off at her stop, rode in a packed car, standing like a sardine. Nobody paid her any mind. Nobody had questions, except me and Marcus, who didn't want to talk about it after we checked the tapes. He didn't show up for work after that. Then it got worse. The next day I saw 2 more of them, dressed differently but all wrong. It's spring, but one of them was in a heavy winter parka. The clothes were okay, but totally out of season and old-fashioned. The second one was dressed like a food delivery courier. The only things they had in common were the black scleras, nails and pale skin with the bumps, the smell and no gadgets. The guy in the parka was holding a newspaper. The courier didn't have a bag. He was carrying a small metal lunchbox. We only stopped the courier because of the box, and because I insisted. Both passed the check and moved on. The duty cop didn't even care. When I asked him, like, don't you see how weird this is? He just said something like, it's just the fashion these days. They're fine. The other guys on shift looked at me like I was a moron too, whenever I tried to bring up the weirdos, especially the younger ones. Chill out, man. There's freaks everywhere now. It's just a trend. Yeah, a trend. The guy with the lunchbox, there was a raw chicken leg in there. And that newspaper, it was a vintage original. From back when I was a toddler getting smacked by my mom for being picky and not eating my spinach. That's when I realized either I'd totally lost my mind, or everyone else had. And meanwhile, there was more of them every day. Groups of them now. I started calling those creeps basementers, because of the paleness and the stink. The basementers always walked with purpose, always carrying something weird or hiding their hands in their pockets. The men and women all had the same long nails and stuff, and that horrible feeling that was driving me crazy. Run, run. I took sick leave. I couldn't do it anymore. I called my kids, told them everything straight up. You know how they reacted. Said they'd drop by during the week to check on me. Told me I needed to rest or get my head examined by a professional. And I would have gone to a shrink right away, but then my coworker, my regular relief, messaged me. We don't talk much, but he tracked down my number somehow. Turned out he saw it all too. And it was driving him insane too. He said he quit because something inside him was screaming to get out of the city. He babbled about some prophetic dream, said his grandma was some kind of seer and he's got the sight too. And his gut told him that whatever this thing is, it feeds on the big city, and it's spreading fast. Faster than that whole 2020 mess did. I was exhausted. I decided we were both crazy, me and my buddy. Felt relieved at the same time because I wasn't alone anymore. But in the end, I went to the shrink, and on the way there, I saw maybe 20 of those basementers in the crowd. I accidentally locked eyes with one of them. Usually they just look straight ahead if you don't touch them. They don't do anything and don't pay attention, but this one looked. I nearly messed my pants. He stopped, put a clawed finger to his lips in a shush gesture, and smiled with that jackal's mouth of his. And then I saw what he was holding. I ran. I made it to the doctor's office, and he prescribed me some sedatives. Said at least I wasn't hallucinating, 'cause he sees 'em too. The weird kids with the weird fashion. Said it's nothing to worry about. Fashions change and the city's always full of strange people. Well, at least I know there's no point in going to the cops. They'll just turn me away too. Besides, my instincts are screaming that I need to leave now. Time's running out. I don't know what's next. I've been blowing up my kids' and friends' phones. Some of them listened, promised they'd at least head out to the country for the weekend if they can. My kids said they'd come too. We aren't that close, but they're my kids. If they don't show up, I don't even want to think about it. I'm finishing this message now. My bags are packed. I'm catching the first bus to my place in the countryside, and I suggest you do the same. Or if you still think I'm just some burnt-out fart losing his grip, at least take a good look at the people around you in the crowd. Even if they look perfectly normal, make an effort. Look closer. Take a sniff. See what they've got in their hands. Like that guy in the crowd when I was on my way to a dock. In his thin palm, with those long, black, sharp fingertips, he was holding an old Polaroid, the one that went missing from my uniform pocket a couple of days ago. The photo was of my old lady, rest her soul, the one I took when we were at the beach. That light beige dress. She was holding a rubber ring she used to take to the beach, posing, flashing me a peace sign with 2 fingers. Fingers looking like long black claws. Well, you know how it is. On that old photo, she looked very fashionable, very trendy for today. Take care of yourselves, guys, and seriously, get out of the city this weekend. I thought she needed help when I first saw her. It was my first time backpacking on my own. I had been on a handful of trips before with friends, but I decided it was time to challenge myself. Besides, it's so hard to coordinate scheduling with everyone, and now half of my friends are married. I thought it would be easier to go alone. I decided to take Dead Man's Loop, a trail local to my area. I was about 2 days into a 4-day trip when I saw her standing to the right in the tree line. Her clothes were tattered and she carried no pack. She was no hiker. The weirdest thing was her smile. Anywhere else it would have simply come off as polite, almost benign, but out here in the condition she was in was immediately unsettling. "Are you okay?" I asked her. She didn't say a word. She just kept smiling, then stepped towards me. I stepped back, but she kept coming. She reached her arms out towards me. I tripped back over a rock as she gripped my shirt, and it tore as I fell backwards into a small, flowing creek. She stopped just short of the water. I stood up, my pants and the bottom of my pack now soaking wet. "What the hell is your problem, lady?" I stepped towards her, but something about her smile stopped me. It wasn't right. Then I noticed more figures in the trees behind her. More people, and they were smiling and just staring at me. I started to walk back and cross to the opposite side of the creek from them. None of them followed. I turned and started to run to put some distance between me and them. I ran so hard and so fast I was barely paying attention to what was in front of me when I almost ran into 2 more people walking on the trail. I barely stopped and they turned, startled, and my heart was racing. For a moment I thought it was more of them, but they were normal. They were a man and a woman who appeared close to me in age. I was actually relieved when I saw the upset looks on their faces. The man stepped between me and the woman and said, "Hey man, what's the matter with you?" I pointed back behind me trying to catch my breath. "There were people. They were smiling and they tried to attack me." "What the hell are you talking about?" "Kyle, maybe he needs help," the woman suggested. I hunched over and took a moment to catch my breath. "There are strange people in these woods. I saw them back before the creek. There's something wrong with them. I don't know how they all got out here." "Are you on something, man?" Kyle asked. "No, just listen. I think you might, or we might all be in danger." "I think you need to step back and leave us alone." The woman pointed her finger down the trail and asked, "Who is that?" I followed her hand and saw a man walk out onto the trail. I could see he had a slight grin on his face. He calmly set some kind of object down in the middle of the path, then disappeared back into the trees. We all slowly approached the object. Once we got closer, I could see it looked like a pair of eyeglasses. The woman gasped and hugged Kyle. "Jenny, what's wrong?" he asked. Jenny's voice quivered. "Those look like my old boyfriend's glasses." "Derek?" "Yes," she whispered. Then Kyle turned to me. "Is this some kind of prank, bro? How did your friend have Derek's glasses?" I sighed. I swear I don't know who that was or who Derek is. Why would I? "Derek's her late boyfriend," Kyle said. Just as he said that, a branch snapped at the tree line. Several more people with smiles were standing and staring at us. "Let's get out of here," Jenny pleaded. We began walking away from them. The couple reluctantly let me tag along with them. All I knew is I didn't want to be alone in that forest anymore. Eventually we all stopped to regroup and discuss a plan. Kyle spoke first. "Maybe we should head back the way we came. We don't know what's ahead of us." "And run back into those people? Besides, there's more of them on the other side of the creek. We're better off pushing forward. I assume you guys parked at the trailhead like me. If we just stick together and finish this loop, we can all get out of here." "Don't tell us what to do, man. We don't know you. Why should we let you come with us?" Jenny interjected. "He's right, and he should come with us. There's strength in numbers." "Do either of you have any weapons?" I asked. "We may need them. Who knows what those people are capable of?" "I have some bear spray," Jenny said. "I have my pocket knife," Kyle added. Then I lifted my coat to reveal a handgun. "And I have my 9mm. Let's be ready for whatever happens." They eyed my gun but didn't say anything. Soon we were continuing on the trail. For some time we were silent. We didn't see any more of those people, and it almost felt like a normal hike again. The birds were singing and there was a pleasant breeze blowing through the trees. I started to want to pretend we weren't in any danger. Eventually Jenny turned to me and said, "Hey, I think I recognize you. Did you go to Grandview High? Weren't you on the baseball team?" I smiled. I hadn't thought about that in some time. Why, yes I was. I pitched. Did you go there? We both did, but we're a class of 19. You're a little older, right? Yeah, I graduated in 17. I didn't really have any friends in the younger grades besides my teammates. Kyle interjected. Baseball? That's kind of boring, isn't it? Some people think so, but I think it's fun. Babe, shut up. You know I love baseball. Jenny laughed. That doesn't make it any less boring. We all talked for a while, getting to know one another. We swapped stories about shared teachers, and Jenny asked me about the year we went to state. Kyle wasn't a very active participant in that part of the conversation. At some point we had to stop and make camp because the sun was starting to set and none of us wanted to take any risks getting lost in the woods at night. We found a nice flat spot that already had a built-up fire pit and plenty of firewood left by the previous people who passed through. I built a big, bright fire. I didn't know if it would ward anything off, but it comforted me. Soon we were sitting in silence consuming our dinners. I finished off the contents of a MRE, while they ate some pork and beans. We watched the woods for faces, but there were none. I hoped that we were out of the territory of those things, but deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. After we finished eating, we set up our tents. I crawled inside and listened. Crickets chirped and owls hooted, but I still had a hard time falling asleep. My knife and my gun served me as welcome bedmates, as I eventually drifted off to sleep. I woke to the sound of tapping on the fabric of my tent. I instantly sat up. My heart was racing and adrenaline surged through my veins. I quickly began unzipping my sleeping bag, and just as I got a light on, something tore through the tent. I cut a hole in the fabric on the opposite side and quickly grabbed my gun as I rolled out. I held up the light and it crawled out of the hole I made. I stepped back and it stood and came right for me. It looked like a normal person, except the grin, which was the same as the rest. This one looked like a man. I held up my gun and fired 3 shots into its chest. It barely flinched. I backed right up to the other tent when I heard Kyle's voice. What the hell? He had finally peeked his head out of his tent. As soon as Kyle was present, that thing suddenly turned away from me and marched back into the forest. I shined my light around in the woods and it seemed like that was the only one around. For now, at least. I looked down at the gun shaking in my hand. It almost got me, I said. It came right through my tent. When I shot it, it acted like it was nothing. I heard Jenny whisper, "How are we supposed to stop those things?" We need to stick together. It turned tail the second Kyle came out of the tent. I spent the rest of the night in their tent. It was awkward and cramped, and Kyle kept his eyes on me, but nothing else bothered us. By the time the sun rose, I was still exhausted, and we still had at least one more night out there. There wasn't any sign of the one that attacked me the previous night, or any of the other ones. I didn't bother packing my tent as it was torn to shreds, and soon we were back on the trail again. We didn't bother with breakfast. I think all of us silently agreed that we'd rather be out of those woods sooner rather than later. We all talked very little. We never felt like we were alone. The sightings were gradual at first. We would see one occasionally walking in the distance, or hear a branch snap behind the brush, but for some time they kept their distance. Then they would stand in the tree line. They were almost like trail markers or road signs pointing the way. We tried our best to ignore them and stay close to each other. Kyle was always in the middle. After some time, we saw another standing in the middle of the path. This one appeared to be a young man close to us in age. Above its smile, it wore glasses, and it took me a moment to recognize, but they were the same glasses we had found on the trail on the first day since this started. Jenny immediately froze. Her voice was barely audible. "Derek?" Suddenly Kyle began stomping right towards it. His fist was balled, ready to hit it. "Get out of here, you freaks! Stay the hell away!" It started to step back into the woods as if inviting him to follow. I ran after Kyle, grabbing him by the shoulder in an attempt to stop him. All I received in return is an elbow to the nose. My eyes were watering, and for a moment my head was spinning. I could already feel blood pouring out of my nose. By the time I recovered enough to look up, I could see Jenny standing between Kyle and the false Derek. It stood grinning just a few feet behind her, but it was as still as a statue. There were tears in her eyes. "Please, Kyle, stop. I need you. I know that's not the real Derek. Please stay with me." Kyle looked at her and slowly his fist began to unball. As he did that, the thing calmly retreated back into the woods. "I'm sorry. Just seeing it wearing his face makes me so angry. He was my best friend too." Then he turned to me and said, "Oh, and sorry about your nose, man." I shrugged. We continued on. Kyle and Jenny held hands as we walked. Eventually we stopped to have lunch. I sat close to them as I had to be, but was by myself as I ate. To my surprise, Kyle sat down in front of me. At first, he didn't say anything. He just watched me while I watched the forest. He broke the silence first. "Hey man, sorry I've been a bit of an a-hole. I swear I didn't mean to elbow you. I just get so defensive of Jenny. To be honest, sometimes I think she'll find someone better than me." It's all good. Don't worry about it, and I'm sure you two are great together." I didn't know what else to say, but he kept looking at me like he expected me to say more. Eventually he spoke. "I remember you too. We actually had a class together. We both took Spanish together." I couldn't remember him for the life of me, but I said, "Oh yeah, Mr. Floor's class. That's right." He smiled. "Yeah, we sat in the same cluster. You were always talking to Melissa. Do you still talk to her?" I remembered Melissa, but she was about the only thing I remembered. Not since before she had her kid. That's too bad. Our conversation ended as Kyle noticed something behind me. "What is that?" he asked. I turned to face what he was looking at. Just underneath a rock on the trail was what looked like a photograph. He walked over and picked it up. "Hey man, what is it?" I asked. He didn't acknowledge me at all. He turned and beelined straight towards Jenny. There wasn't an ounce of affection for her on his face. He held up a Polaroid for her to see. Her face went pale and I managed to see it over her shoulder. It was just a picture of Jenny in a bed with another man, and judging from her haircut, in the photo, it was recent. "I don't know how... That isn't real," she sputtered. Kyle's eyes were wide. "Don't lie to me. I knew there was something going on between you two. That guy wasn't even funny and you laughed at everything he said." Then he dropped the photo into the dirt and turned away. Tears were flowing now. "Please, Kyle, I love you. I'm sorry." "You can find your own way out of here. You're not my problem anymore." He started to walk away and I tried to grab him and stop him. He turned and grappled with me, then managed to land a heavy punch on my jaw. I let him go. He immediately began walking. "We can't let him go," Jenny pleaded. "If he wants to walk straight into those things, let him. I'm tired of getting hit in the face." She sniffed, but didn't say anything else. After we finished packing, we headed out on the trail. Kyle was nowhere to be seen. I could see his tracks for some time until they vanished suddenly, and completely in the middle of the trail. I did not mention this to Jenny. Jenny, for her part, wept as we walked and went on about Kyle. "I can't believe I let him walk away like that. You don't believe I meant to hurt him, do you? What have I done?" Her voice was an ambient buzz to me. My only goal was to get out of there alive, not to be a counselor for her relationship issues. Mostly I just let her talk while I watched the tree line. The sun was beginning to set as we crested one final hill overlooking the parking area at the start of the trailhead. There were 2 vehicles there, my truck and presumably Kyle and Jenny's car. The parking lot was separated from the trailhead by a narrow stream that flowed year-round. At this time of year, one could simply hop over the stream to avoid touching the water. At the bottom of the hill facing into the trees was a figure that looked unmistakably like Kyle from behind. Before I could say or do anything, Jenny was already scrambling down the hill. I shouted, "Jenny, wait!" She ignored me, and I watched helplessly as the figure turned around just as she reached it. It indeed looked like Kyle, remarkably so. At this distance, I could tell no difference, save for the calm grin plastered across its face. Jenny's reaction was too slow, and the figure grabbed Jenny in an iron grip and began dragging her into the forest. She screamed. I sprinted down the hill, but 3 more of them emerged from the forest, blocking my path. I stopped as they began advancing toward me. All the while, I could hear Jenny's screams move deeper and deeper into the trees. I took a step back, then felt something from behind grab my pack. I struggled for only a moment, as I unclipped the pack and ran towards the parking lot, avoiding the things in front of me. They moved with intention and purpose, but at a speed no faster than a brisk walk. I looked back only a moment, to see about a dozen of them coming after me. I sprinted and jumped across the stream and ran straight for my truck. As I turned to face them, I could see that they were all stopped just before the stream. Not one of them took a step further. I could still hear Jenny's screams ringing in my ears, but there were too many. I got into my truck, and for a moment my stomach dropped as it struggled to turn over, but then the engine suddenly roared to life and I immediately peeled out onto the road. I didn't look back. I didn't slow down. I never stopped until I was out of those woods and back on pavement. I never told anyone in town what happened. Maybe I should have told the police, but I didn't see any point. I didn't think anyone would ever believe me, and I didn't want to be implicated in anything. I eventually heard about Kyle and Jenny's disappearance on the news. Their bodies were never found. I haven't been the same since. Every stranger's smile makes me shudder. I haven't been in the woods since, and I hate being alone. Worst of all, I see Kyle and Jenny's faces everywhere. In my thoughts, in my dreams, and sometimes in random crowds, but what I fear most is the day when I run out of places to go, and I see them with grins plastered on their faces. During my youth, I lived in a small town in Oklahoma named Panama. I stayed in a tiny, wooden house with my dad where the floorboards creaked and the house rattled with every step. Our house, like all of Panama, was surrounded by miles of forest with nothing else in sight. Every year, dozens of people go missing in that woody maze. During one summer, as I was laying in bed, my dad came in my room and told me to get out of the house for a while. "You're 14 now, Mike. I trust you to play in the woods alone. Just don't go too far. Never let the house leave your sight." I usually just spent my summers in my room reading. It was a small town, and I was too shy to make friends with the few kids that lived around there. I found a tall oak tree to sit under, and was in the middle of picking at the grass when I heard a sound in some bushes a few feet in front of me. I jumped at first, but relaxed when I noticed it was just a dog. I was surprised. Not many stray dogs could be found this far out in the woods, but that thought left my mind when I really looked at it. It was an older, female dog of medium height. She had blue eyes and a short, black coat of fur that covered her slender body. However, she had small, gray lumps on her skin that looked fleshy and pale. I assumed it was some kind of tumor, but she seemed to be in fine health. In fact, her eyes had some sort of intelligence about them that I'd never seen in a dog. She walked slowly towards me and wagged her tail, and I smiled knowing I had found a friend for the summer. We spent the next month chasing each other through the woods and swimming in the small pond behind my house. I knew my dad would never let me keep a dog, but she seemed fine out there. She never ate the food I snuck her, or drank the water from the pond, but she remained perfectly healthy. I named her Luna, and she became my best friend. One night, I woke up to howling in the woods. It sounded like Luna, but she never cried like this. The only noise she made was quiet, gentle barks. I slipped on my shoes and started sneaking out of the house. I knew the right floorboards to step on and left my house without making a sound. I hesitated before entering the woods. I'd never been out here alone in the dark. The trees that I knew so well towered over me like dark giants, glaring down from above. Nervously, I entered the woods and began walking towards the sound. As the cries grew louder, I began to run. I ran until I could no longer see the house, and I was surrounded by nothing but darkness and those cries that were now so loud that I wondered how a dog could ever sound like that. Eventually, after running for at least a mile, I found where Luna had gone. There was a wide hole beneath a tree that went down in a slant like the side of a triangle. Inside the hole, I heard the shouts of Luna that were getting quieter as she went further inside. I yelled her name over and over again, praying she would come out, but eventually her cries faded completely. After taking a deep breath, I got on my knees and crawled inside the hole, determined to find my friend. After crawling a few feet into the hole, I was in complete darkness. The faint moonlight could no longer reach me, and I felt so alone. However, I kept crawling on. What felt like hours passed, and the once spacious hole began to narrow. I had to duck my head down and then press my limbs tight against each other before finally resorting to laying like a worm and inching down that hole. Fear started to creep up on me. How would I turn around and get out? And how did this hole in the woods go down so deep? But I simply kept going. I felt a sharp pain in my scalp as my head dug into the sharp rocks above. My elbows were rubbed raw by the tunnel walls that somehow kept getting narrower. I cried out in pain and tried to press against the walls with all my strength, but I couldn't move them an inch. I have no idea how far down I crawled, but it felt as if I was trapped in a coffin 1,000 feet below the earth. Yet, despite this, there was enough room for me to continue inching forward. It was strange. I felt like this tunnel was almost made for me. I thought about trying to turn back multiple times, but every time I tried, I could hear the faint sound of Luna's cry, and I would continue my crawl down the tunnel. All of a sudden, the tunnel widened by a few feet, and I almost shouted in happiness. It widened and widened until I could stand up. I began walking forward until my head smacked into the wall. I expected the blow to hurt and to deepen the cut on my head that was already feeling warm with blood, but instead it felt soft. The wall was muddy and felt cool against my skin. Worried about Luna being trapped in a muddy prison, I pressed myself inside and walked forward, one step at a time. It felt like I was traveling through icy cold jello. However, movement was getting easier, and the mud started to feel good. It grew warmer until it felt like I was taking a nice bath. Eventually, the mud gave way to what felt like water, allowing me to swim through it. I dived down into the dark abyss, my lungs never crying for air despite the fact that I should have long since drowned by now. An overwhelming peace filled my mind. I no longer thought about leaving or finding Luna, just about going deeper into the earth. I never opened my eyes. A voice in my head that didn't seem like my own told me that would ruin the profound peace that I felt now. I never wanted to leave. This was heaven for me. That wasn't until a small drop of blood from the cut on my scalp dripped into my eye, and I woke up from the trance. Immediately a smell of rot entered my nose. It wasn't like the rot I had smelt from dead animals or bad meat, but something infinitely worse. It's really hard to explain. The smell felt impossible. It was like something had been rotting for generations without ever fully decaying. I instinctively started gagging, but stopped when the water that now felt harsh and cold entered my mouth. The taste was infinitely worse than the smell, and I began to cry as I choked down that rotten liquid. Despite the taste, it looked perfectly clear, yet I could tell there was something unnatural about it. I could breathe it like air, and it filled me with strength. Something in my mind still screamed out, telling me not to open my eyes. It was like an interloper had hacked into my brain, but despite the protest, I looked up and opened them. The first thing I noticed was the eyes. Thousands of eyeballs stared at me. Some of the eyes had a faint glimmer of humanity, while others looked like those of wild beasts. Gray, fleshy limbs spread across the walls like the roots of an ancient tree, branching outward in thin, twisted lines. Bodies had been stretched so tightly into the stone that their arms, legs, and torsos split away from one another. Where one body ended, another began. Their limbs molded together like they were made of clay. The thin bodies bent in every direction like creatures with no spine. But I knew that wasn't true because I could see bones protruding through the gray, tortured flesh. The limbs thrashed against each other, rotten teeth and unkempt nails attacking anything in sight. But nothing died. No matter how much they suffered, life never escaped those eyes. I felt a primal fear that I had never experienced before that moment. There are stories from mythology of impossible, terrifying creatures that could drive men to insanity just by looking at them. Now, in this moment, I understood how those imaginary people must have felt. There are some things that the mind simply can't comprehend. The voice in my head was screaming now, telling me to close my eyes and keep swimming down. As the tunnel went deeper into the earth, it had slowly narrowed without me noticing. Because of this, I could see the entire creature that lay at the bottom of the hole. It was a massive clump of gray, pale flesh that pushed tight against the walls. The sides of the creature were red and bloody, as if its massive body was forced into that small space. A sea of limbs covered the monster, and I saw a fleshy tentacle molding them into shapes before adding them to the wall. Sometimes it took a body down to rearrange it before putting it back, like a child playing with Play-Doh. However, its movement was confined to the edge of the wall, almost like it was part of the earth. I never took a clear look at the center of the monster, but from the corner of my eye, I could see what looked like the start of a wrinkly smile, like the mouth of a newborn baby. All of this took place in the span of a few seconds, and suddenly my fear caught up to me. Despite the fact that my limbs were tired and sore, the sight of that thing gave me newfound strength. I swam up hard, going as fast as my small body could take me. Instantly, the thousands of mouths along the wall rang out in a cry. It was loud and almost unbearable. I could tell the creature was trying to sound desperate, to make me feel pity, but it couldn't hide the malice in its voice. As I swam, I heard thousands of different cries, but one stuck out in my mind. It was the bark of a dog. I looked around and noticed the figure of Luna, now taking her place against the wall. The gray spot that I thought was a tumor had overtaken her body, until I could barely see her jet black coat. I held in my tears and swam upwards. However, I didn't pay attention to how close I was getting to one of the tunnel walls. A gray hand grabbed onto my knee, and I barely fought it off before I continued swimming. Eventually, I found a tunnel that was different from mine. It was much bigger, and after some hours, I managed to climb back to the surface. Upon exiting the hole, I noticed the orange glow of the sunrise illuminating the woods. I collapsed on the ground and passed out for what had to be hours. When I woke up, I wandered the forest in an attempt to find my house. My clothes were soaked with mud and the weird water that filled the tunnel. I smelled like death, but I knew that even if I took off my clothes, the rotten liquid would still remain on my skin. Eventually, I recognized the road and walked for 3 miles back to town. A police car noticed me and picked me up as my dad had already reported me missing that morning. I never told them what happened. I just couldn't. I said I woke up in the middle of the woods and that I had no idea where the mud and smell came from. Years went by and that experience never faded from my mind. I left that town as soon as I could and moved out to California, where I lived alone in a crappy apartment. I was content with that life until one morning when I saw a small gray lump on my knee. I cut it off, but it kept coming back. More appeared, and they eventually started covering the entirety of my legs and back, no matter how many times I cut them off. That same voice entered my mind from before. At first, it was only a whisper at the edge of my thoughts. Then it began speaking over them, drowning out every attempt at reason. Now, when I try to think, all I hear is that voice, and mine feels like just a distant echo fading deeper into nothingness. I'm writing this from a motel in Panama on my laptop. I can't fight it anymore. The only thing I want is to go back and feel the warm embrace of that liquid within the tunnel. I'm ready to play with Luna again. It's been years, but I know she'll still be there. I still remember the route to my house, and I'm not waiting another second. I'm going now. I'll join the symphony of gray flesh as the newest root, and I hope Luna will be next to me. I'm going to post this online before I leave. Maybe someone will see it. Here's a final message to my readers. If you ever find yourself in Panama, Oklahoma, take a stroll through the woods. The creature there will give you everlasting peace. Come see me and Luna. We'll be waiting.
Tonight I will be telling 6 stories. This lineup is going to be comprised of all sorts of different kind of horrors. In the pinned comment, I will have the titles, authors, and timestamps available. In my previous video's comment section, someone asked if I could start doing so, and I thought it was a great idea. I would like to remind everyone that I do read almost all of my comments, or I at least try my best to. So if you have any ideas or critiques, I'm likely to see it. A huge thank you to the writers who allow me to share their stories. They are the ones who make these videos possible, and there are links where you can find more of their work in the description. Remember, you can send in your own story to rylhstories@gmail.com. If you enjoy these hour-long videos, please be sure to drop a like rating, as it lets me know that you want more of them. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated, but only if you like the content. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. I grew up in a small rural town. It had a sort of quaint charm to it. The main street was lined with old buildings that had been renovated into shops. My favorite was always the family-run takeaway shop on the corner and the bakery, which had the best apple pies. But there were also more essential structures like a post office, grocery store, gas station, pub, and a central town hall. Past that there was the school, which was small and underfunded, and then rows of houses that gradually faded into farms, and rolling hills, lush with newly sown crops. As a child, I greatly enjoyed roaming the streets. It was naturally a safe town, and the idea that a kid could get snatched wasn't even considered. The cautionary warnings we were told included, stay away from the creepy old man on the corner, and don't go in the tunnels, which essentially gave my friends and I free rein, as long as we were home in time for dinner. And trust me, we were always home for dinner, since being late meant we went to bed without. Now I suppose I should tell you a little bit more about the tunnels. You see, since we lived in a high rainfall area, the storm drains around the town were huge and old. This meant that in the streets, they were your basic graded storm drains, crusted with rust. However, where they led out a little ways out of town, they were basically giant round holes in the side of cement blocks that you could easily climb into. There were stories of other kids going into them, and getting lost in the supposed labyrinth of underground tunnels, never to be seen again. Which is why our parents didn't want us going into them. Sadly, my friends and I were not graced with common sense, or ears that listened to our parents' warnings. Which is why one fine spring day, all 5 of us, Brody, Paul, Brian, Matt, and myself, decided that we were going to be the ones to explore the tunnels. We decided that we would go on Saturday after lunch, fancying ourselves to be professionals. We planned to ride our bikes to a set of drain outlets we'd found out past the school and bring with us flashlights, rope and string, walkie-talkies, water bottles, and snacks. I was the first to arrive, Throwing my bike to the ground, I ran to look into the tunnel, and as I thought glaring into the darkness would somehow make my friends arrive faster. While I waited, a light breeze rippled across the grass, and a cloud blew into the path of the sun. This sent a chill down my spine. I suddenly felt watched, and as I stared into the abyss of the tunnel, I couldn't help but wonder if there was something in there looking back at me. My trance was broken as a hand slapped down hard on my shoulder, startling me enough that I flinched and earned a round of howling laughter from my friends. "Not scared, are you?" Brian taunted, to which I just muttered a flat, "Whatever, loser," in response. Brian was the jerk of the group, always a shit-eating grin plastered on his face, and something witty to say. He certainly kept us on our toes. Meanwhile, his twin Paul was much more reasonable, the level-headed one of the group. He kept us all in line. Matt was the next to arrive, his red hair unmistakable even from a distance, and with his arrival, he brought an excited energy. He was rearing to go onward to another adventure. It had been his idea in the first place to explore the tunnels. The kid was fearless. Following him shortly was Brody, who was, as usual, the last to arrive, sweaty and disheveled. He threw his bike down and began to fervently list off his excuses for being late. Well, we just rolled our eyes and generally ignored what he was actually saying to tell him instead, "Yeah, sure, you were chased by dogs, and hit by a car, and caught in a freak storm." Pissed him off to no end, but we were at least entertained. With everyone present, and once we had all settled, we ran back through our plan of action. It was decided that since Brody was the last to arrive, he would be the one to stand watch outside the entrance, while the rest of us went into the tunnels. The idea was that all four of us would go in together, and as we came across forks in the road, Paul and I, as Team 1, would take one direction, leaving Brian and Matt, as Team 2, to take the other. To stop ourselves from getting lost, we tied strings to ourselves, and it would also be Brody's job to keep the reels of thread moving freely. From there, we synchronized our watches and radios, turned on our flashlights, and were ready to go. We entered the drainage pipe one at a time, crawling on our hands and knees, positively giddy with excitement. I really don't even remember what we were hoping to find. Anyway, I'm not going to lie. Crawling along with a flashlight in one hand and a walkie-talkie in the other wasn't exactly as easy as we'd anticipated, but none of us complained. The novelty began to wear off as we got to a point where we'd turned a corner and could no longer see daylight shining in. The change in mood was near instantaneous. Our light joking dropped off. Our pace slowed, and everyone got quieter. It was as if the darkness suddenly became truly dark, and it sent a ripple of unease through us. When we reached our first crossroad, there was hesitance to split up. Though none of us said it, we didn't really want to anymore. Hell, I think we barely even wanted to continue at all. It was a gut feeling we should have listened to, but like the foolish kids we were, we pressed onward, splitting into two groups, as planned, so we couldn't get called pussies. Brian and Matt took the right tunnel, while Paul and I took the left. For a little while, we could hear the sound of them shuffling along, and looking back, we could see intermittent flashes of light from their torches, but after some time we were completely alone. "This isn't creepy at all," Paul commented sarcastically as we crawled along. "Oh yeah, walk in the park." I agreed with equal enthusiasm when ahead of me he stopped. "There's a drop-off here," he informed me. "Is it far?" I inquired. "Doesn't look like it. There's a ladder down there, but there's water." He relayed the information as he scanned the area below with his flashlight. "I'm going to climb down and see how deep it is. Hold the light on me," he instructed. "Alright, be careful." I agreed, taking the time to shuffle up so that I could hold the torch on him as he shimmied down the service ladder. As Paul climbed down the ladder carefully, I was able to crawl forward to look into the new area. Ahead I could see that before us was a large compartment with an opening at the other end. There were tide marks up the concrete walls, indicating that the chamber flooded sometimes, and the different levels at which the water had reached. The water that was in there at the current, however, was an expanse of stagnant, inky black liquid. The surface perfectly unnaturally still, with not even so much as a breath of wind to disturb it. I could find myself shining the light directly down into the water, in an attempt to see the bottom, but under the light's focus, I could see that the water was actually a murky brown, and that there wasn't any way I'd be able to see the bottom through it. Distracted by my thoughts, I lost my grip on one of the flashlights, and it fell into the water with a hard splash before going out, and at the same time, caused Paul to lose his grip as he slipped on the last rung, and crashed into the water shortly after the flashlight. There was a moment of panicked shouting and general confusing before I regained enough to shine the remaining light down to where Paul was now standing, drenched and waist deep in water. "Are you stupid? What did you do that for?" He yelled angrily at me as I babbled out a weak excuse of being distracted and clumsy. "Sorry, it just slipped out of my hand. At least we know how deep the water is." I tried. "Whatever. Great. It stinks, you know. Hurry up and get down here," he growled, still annoyed as he pushed his hair back out his face. He wasn't wrong about the smell. The water was clearly rotting or something, and it was cold too, as I discovered when I joined him. We didn't say much else to each other as we made our way through the water towards the other side, awkwardly holding our hands and equipment up out of the foul-smelling liquid as we did. There was something profoundly unsettling about wading through stinky water in the dim of only a single flashlight. More than once I psyched myself out, believing that something had brushed past my legs, and subtly hurried to keep up with Paul. We had almost made it across when Paul stopped, holding his hand up for me to be quiet as I opened my mouth to ask what was wrong. That's when I heard it. A long, low-pitched wail. It wasn't like anything I had ever heard. It was inhuman and echoed through the tunnels to reverberate around the chamber, making it impossible to tell the direction from which it came. "What was that?" I whispered to Paul. "I don't know." He answered quietly. I imagined the look of fear on his face mirrored my own. Neither of us had any idea what it was. "Do you think it's Brian and Matt messing with us?" I asked, trying to rationalize. Yeah. Paul agreed, with a relieved nod. "Let's just get out of this water and see what's on the other side, then we can go back." Okay, yeah. I agreed easily. I didn't want to say that I actually wanted to turn around on the spot and leave. However, we made it to the other side much more quickly, with adrenaline fueling our progress, and once there wasted no time in climbing out of the putrid water. It was also fortunate for us that when we reached the top of the ladder, the new tunnel was large enough for us to actually walk through instead of crawl. This filled us with renewed courage, and we pressed on for some time more. By then, we had no idea how deep in the tunnels we were, and checking our watches proved pointless, as they had both stopped working after our water crossing. This made me anxious. It felt as though had been traveling for a long time, and I wanted to turn back, so I was relieved when Paul suggested that first. With both of us in agreement, we turned back to follow our string tails out. However, we didn't get very far before we heard, or at least we thought we heard, the faint sound of screaming. It sounded as though someone were screaming for help, and the sound of their voice was only ever so slightly being carried to us. "Did you hear that?" I questioned, uncertain. "Yeah," Paul answered, now alert and focusing on the direction we thought it had come from. "Should we call through?" I asked, and with a nod, Paul took one of the walkie-talkies to try and call Brian and Matt. 10 seconds passed with no answer, before we heard the shout again, and this time Paul took off running. "That's Brian," he told me briefly, as I scrambled to keep up. He had the flashlight and I found myself following its light, more than the movement of his body. As we drew nearer, we could hear with more clarity that it was indeed Brian screaming for help, his tone getting more and more desperate with each passing moment, causing Paul to run even faster. I soon found myself struggling to keep up. Paul was always so much faster, and his determination to help his brother was propelling him much more than usual. At first, he was only a little ahead, then slightly farther, and finally, I was running after only the brief glimpses of light ahead of me, before they disappeared altogether. When this happened, I finally stopped. The sound of my own breath and the blood rushing through my ears was nauseating. I couldn't even find the breath to call after him, so I merely stumbled along blindly through the darkness in the general direction he had last been in. To my relief, I managed to catch sight of the glow of lights ahead after only a few moments. It seemed Paul must have stopped running, so I guessed he'd found Brian. I slowed my pace and moved to continue towards the light, but something told me not to. My body suddenly wouldn't move. There was a wet crunching sound resonating through the tunnel back to me, and I realized that Brian had stopped screaming. My heart began to race all over again. What was that sound? Where had Paul gone? I thought to myself. Summoning all the courage I had left, I tiptoed forward silently. A morbid part of me wanted to know what was going on, while the more sensible part of me didn't want to find out. I reached the corner and stopped. All I needed to do was turn and see, but I couldn't. Instead, I stood frozen. I could hear a soft whimpering and the wet crack of bones accompanied by the velvety tearing of flesh that was unmistakable. Steeling myself, I crouched down with my heart in my throat and slowly began to peek around the corner. What I saw next is something that will stay with me forever. The scene was illuminated by flashlights abandoned on the floor and contained within the expanse of cement hallway. The first thing that caught my eye, however, was the mangled remains of a person hanging from the ceiling. It looked as though his own bones had been broken in his arms and legs and used to anchor him in place. His insides were hanging loosely down, dripping, coagulating blood onto the floor with his exposed rib bones. The face was mangled beyond recognition, but I could tell this, unfortunately, was Matt from the tufts of red hair still visible on what remained of his scalp. On the ground was Paul. Standing over him was something. It was crouched, its knees bent upward besides its face in the same way a human's would if someone was squatting awkwardly. It had 4 arms, long and spindly as they were. It was using 2 to hold Paul down, while the other 2 were digging into his chest before bringing chunks of flesh to its mouth and chewing in relish. Paul's eyes were rolled back in their sockets lifelessly, and I knew he was gone. But that's when I noticed Brian. He was slumped away just past the creature. He was looking at me and mouthing the words, "Help me," repeatedly. Tears streamed down his face, but one look at him told me there was no way he'd be able to walk, let alone run, on his own. I shook my head at him helplessly, and he wailed in pure terrified desperation, something that regained him the creature's attention, and it turned back to him. He screamed in panic, but the sound was no more than a gargling mess that erupted from his damaged throat. I couldn't watch any longer, and shakily turned back to return the way I'd come. I crawled with agonizing slowness to remain silent through pitch-black darkness, guided only by the rope tethered to my waist for hours and hours. By the time I finally crawled back out, it was dark, and the area was bathed in the red and blue lights of police. For the last part of my journey, it had actually been their voices through blowhorns that had guided me. I was the one that made it out that day. Matt and Paul's bodies were washed out of the tunnels with the next flood. The damage to them was attributed to falling and being tumbled about in the floodwaters, while Brian's body was never recovered. No one believed me when I told them what had happened. I was sent to a shrink for years after. I think that everyone was expecting that someday I'd change my story, but that's the truth of what happened. Brody did believe me, but we lost touch. Or rather, he avoided me. He had heard the screams from outside the tunnel and ran to get help after tying our lifelines to a nearby tree. He briefly and quietly mentioned to me only once that he had seen something moving in the tunnels not too long after we had gone in. He assumed it was us, and though the way its eyes glowed back white in the darkness made him uneasy, he never radioed what he saw through to us, just as he never mentioned this to the cops or anyone but myself. I think he blames himself just as much as I blame myself. Or maybe he's not telling me the whole truth. Either way, it's been years now. I only thought to write this out because I recently returned home to visit my parents. The town was just the same as ever, only that the storm drains are now inaccessible. I saw them installing massive metal grates to stop kids going down them. Apparently another group of kids disappeared in those tunnels a week before I returned. Authorities say they're still hopeful to find them, but I know that they won't. I've been in the custodial business for about 10 years now, and I've recently discovered a truth that a lot of people don't even consider. When I've talked to friends and strangers about anything paranormal, everyone mentions abandoned buildings, churches, battlefields, and murder houses as places of major ghost activity. But if you talk to theater people, especially the actors, they'll do their best to convince you that theaters are some of the most haunted places in the world. Now, I'll be the first to say that I'm not a superstitious person, and people involved with the stage are some of the most superstitious people in the world. God help you if you say Macbeth anywhere in the theater, and if you wish them good luck, instead of break a leg, you get death stares until you correct yourself. But I've been working as a custodian in my town's local community theater for about a year and a half, and I've seen and heard things that I cannot explain. And after the last incident, I don't want to go back to work there. I'm not going to tell you exactly where my town is, or the theater's name, because I really like the owners, but I truly think the shows they put on are great for our community. I don't want this confession here to negatively impact them and force them to close their curtains for good. What I will say is that my town is located in the Rust Belt, and that should be enough. The building the theater is in has a bit of backstory. It was originally built as an assembly plant during the 40s. In the 60s, it was bought and turned into a theater. Well, a performance space. are the exact words the owners told me when they first hired me. In the 70s, it was swept up again in industry and became an assembly plant again till the mid-80s, where it closed and was abandoned for a long time. The current owners, a gay couple from New York named Paul and Joseph, bought it 5 years ago and had it up and running as a theater again in 3 years. Paul and Joe are not spring chickens, and luckily for them, their opening year was an astounding success, and they had funds available for hiring a part-time custodian. At the time, I wasn't working. You see, I had been a custodian at a large high school, and let's just say there was a large percentage of the student body that were far worse than mean-spirited, a harmless prank from a group that were known delinquents. That should have been expelled a long time ago, ended up breaking my left leg in a few places. One lawsuit later, and the delinquents got the justice they deserved, and I had some settlement money to try and recover from the life-changing injury. Sorry, I got off topic. Anyway, I wasn't working at the time when I saw it in the local newspaper that a new theater in town was looking for a part-time janitor. Growing up, I'd always had an appreciation for the theater. I sucked at acting, and I wasn't creative enough to be a designer or anything like that. But in middle and high school, they were always looking for stagehands to help, and I'd always volunteered. Having sat on my butt for a good 10 months, I decided to get my act together and offer my services. Paul and Joe were ecstatic to have me on board, even when I told them I wasn't the fastest at moving due to my bad leg. They didn't mind at all. They told me they were both in their late 60s, so even with a bad leg, I could move faster and clean better than either of them. The pay wasn't much, but I wasn't in it for the money. I was just happy to help out an up-and-coming community venture that gave some much-needed entertainment to my town. They gave me a tour of the building and I could tell instantly I had my work cut out for me. Besides the typical areas a theater has, the box office, the lobby, the bathrooms, the banks of seats, the stage, a lighting booth, backstage, the dressing rooms and the green room, or the actor hangout area, the building was large enough to have a ground-level storage space, a ground-level workshop for building set pieces and props, and a basement storage area. But I had worked in far worse buildings before, and I felt a sort of pride knowing that I'd soon make this place immaculate, and some people would be impressed at how clean the seats and bathrooms and lobbies were. It would be even cooler if the actors would perform here in the future, commented on how well kept the dressing rooms and green room were. I may be a custodian, but I still have a sense of pride in my workmanship. At the end of the tour, after I confirmed that I would be able to do all the required work necessary, Paul and Joe told me of the history of the place. Besides the basic history I shared with you, they told me the darker side of the place. It turns out that 5 people had died in the building. 2 people had perished in an industrial accident during its time as a factory in the 40s, and 2 were killed in a murder-suicide when it was again a factory in the 70s. The most disturbing, however, was the one death during its time as a performance space in the 60s. A performance artist, again I won't give the name as you could pinpoint the theater from it, decided to do an exhibit called Will You Cut Him Down? The piece was supposed to be a challenge to the then modern American squeamishness about death and suicide. The exhibit was supposed to feature the performance artist after he hanged himself. He had used makeup to make it seem like he had been hanging there for hours, and the challenge was, would anyone try and cut him down? However, a mistake was made, and the artist ended up hanging himself for real. In the hours that followed to opening the exhibit, the people that flowed in and out of the place were gawking at his corpse, noting how realistic it looked. It was only discovered he was actually dead when everyone had gone, and his assistant tried to tell him he could stop his performance. Needless to say, the place was quickly closed after that. I must admit that the story of the performance artist was spooky, but it was no big deal to me. I didn't mind working in a place people had died. I asked them why they brought it all up, and Joe confessed that he and Paul thought the place was haunted. When I asked why they thought that, they simply said they'd felt like they were being watched on some occasions when they were cleaning up after shows, and that the booth, where the murder/suicide had happened, was always cold. No matter how hot it was outside, or even if they put a space heater in there. I laughed, informing them that I didn't believe in ghosts, and even if there's somehow worse spirits floating around this place, as long as they didn't interfere with my cleaning, they could wail and clank their chains as much as they pleased. So began my time working at the theater. I poured all my energy into making the place shine, and it really showed. The first show of the season started 2 months after I joined, and Paul and Joe passed on to me how the patrons were amazed at how the building had cleaned up. All the time spent mopping, scrubbing, and polishing had really paid off, and my bosses were extremely grateful for all of my hard work. I was given free tickets to every show, and while some of the performances were a little too artsy for my taste, or maybe I'm simply too gotch for their themes, and layers and things, there were a few plays, like The Tavern by George M. Cohan, that I fully enjoyed. The problems began last October, however, after they had finished up a run of The Blith Spirit. After the final performance, the actors, the crew, and everyone else involved in the production decided to meet at our town's fanciest restaurant for a party. They wanted to celebrate the success of the show, and a profitable season so far. I was invited to come along, but someone needed to stay behind and get the theater cleaned up. So I respectfully declined, opting to sweep, mop, and vacuum the theater so it would look nice the day after. There was going to be a crew showing up to dismantle the set early the next morning. Everything was fine at first. I picked up trash and vacuumed the carpeted lobby, and banks of seats with no issue. However, when it was time to clean the booth, things got weird. It was cold as usual in there, but I always blamed it on weird airflow and poor construction. There are tons of wires in the booth, connecting the theater's lights and sound systems to the actual lights and speakers, so one must be very careful when vacuuming not to accidentally unplug something. So I was used to having to turn off and on my vacuum a couple times in that room to rearrange where it was. That night, when I first turned off my vacuum to move it to a different spot in the room, I heard something. It sounded like whispers. I looked around the room in surprise, but the booth is small, and there was obviously no one else in there with me, much less the theater. My eyes fell upon the sound system, and I thought someone must have not closed the software properly, so the whispers must have been coming through the speakers. Having solved the issue, I continued vacuuming, not touching the sound system as I had no idea how to operate it. A minute or so later, I accidentally knocked some papers off the desk housing the computers and leaned over to pick them up. A loud bang, like that of a gunshot, suddenly blasted into my ears, and as I jumped in surprise, I banged the back of my head on the underside of the desk. It hurt really bad, and as I stumbled away from the desk, trying to open my eyes through the pain, I swear I could see some black form standing in the doorway of the booth. Through squinted eyes, it looked like a bloating cloud of blackness just hanging in the room in front of me, an aura of menace emanating from it. When I took a few seconds to compose myself and look back to the doorway, there was nothing there. I later found out on my own that the man who committed the murder in the 70s shot his coworker for sleeping with his wife before turning the gun on himself. Nothing else happened that night. But it seems that was the dam bursting when it came to spiritual activity. I didn't bother telling anybody about the incident, but when they began happening more and more, I started keeping a log for both myself and my bosses. There were some of the things that Paul and Joe had felt before, like someone was watching me throughout my cleaning routine across the building, some strange movements of shadows, lights flickering on and off, but there were a few scarier incidents. One time, soon after the first incident, I was cleaning up sawdust in the workshop, as it was a major fire hazard. As I was sweeping all the sawdust into a big pile near the center of the room, I was backing up towards a large table saw Joe had recently bought. As my back just touched the end of it, it suddenly sprang to life with a loud whirring sound. I recoiled from the table instantly, turning around to see who had turned it on. No one was there. It was suddenly silent. The saw blade wasn't moving, and the thing wasn't even plugged in. Another event that comes to mind happened in March. The play they were doing at the time involved an old man in a wheelchair. As I was cleaning the stage after a dress rehearsal, with only the ghost light being on as a light source, it's not what you think. Look it up. As I finished sweeping up the last of the dust into my dustbin, a creaking noise reverberated throughout the stage. I slowly turned my head and glanced back to see the wheelchair, with no one in it or pushing it, slowly wheel its way into the very edge of light cast by the ghost light. I stared at the thing for a full moment, not daring to breathe or blink. I was waiting for something, anything, to happen, and all the muscles in my body were tensed up, ready for explosive movement. It just sat there, half hidden in shadows, like it was waiting for me to make a move. I finally reached the conclusion that maybe the wheels were a little bit loose, and for some reason, it had just rolled off its place on the side of the stage by sheer coincidence. I relaxed, set my broom and dustbin down, and slowly walked over to the wheelchair to push it back into its place. I leaned down and grabbed a wheelchair by its armrests, ready to push the thing straight back up to its holding spot. As my head was closer to the darkness, however, I saw something that stopped me instantly and made my blood run cold as ice. On the back handles of the wheelchair, just out of the illumination of the ghost light, were two black hands, each one gripping the handles tightly. They were covered with scars, burns, and cuts that had no blood flowing from them, and whatever arms they were attached to disappeared into the darkness behind them. I immediately turned and bolted from the building, stopping only to lock the front door behind me, partially to stop burglars from getting in, and partially to stop what I'd just seen from following me out. Yet everything else pales in comparison to what happened last week. It's the worst by far, and it's making me wonder if I have the mental fortitude to keep working at the theater. Joe and Paul are now good friends of mine, and I've truly enjoyed my time working for them and helping the theater thrive. But after last week, I'm honestly afraid my life would be in danger if I entered that place even one more time. Last week I was cleaning the dressing rooms, getting them prepared for another group of actors to come and use them. It must have been around 10 p.m., and I was alone as usual. I was wiping down the mirrors and makeup desks we have in the dressing rooms. There's a loud clock in both male and female dressing rooms, whose ticking is almost so loud you could hear it in the hallways outside. So I was wiping down a desk, lost in thought about something. Maybe it was about a show I watch. I can't remember. What I do remember, however, is suddenly realizing that I can no longer hear the loud ticking of the clock. This was very strange to me, but clocks do stop, so I turn around to look at it to confirm it stopped. It had stopped, but that wasn't what made my eyes wide and the hair stand on the back of my neck. It was the noose hanging mere inches from my face that caused my heart to start pounding like crazy. Not only was the rope close to my face, but the noose was hung low enough to slip over my head and onto my neck perfectly. As I stared at the knotted contraption of death in confusion and terror, another sound came to my ears, the creak of a slightly swinging rope. Looking into one of the far mirrors, a chill ran down my spine as I could see a second rope dangling down from the blackness of the ceiling behind me. But this rope was pulled completely taut, like something was hanging from it, and that's when I saw it. In the mirror, I could see parts of a face peering out from behind me, watching me watch it in the mirror. Only the top left side of the head was visible, and what I could see made me shake in abject horror. Long, stringy gray hair fell off to the side. The skin of its forehead was pale from lack of blood. Its one visible eye socket was deeply sunken in and dark, but the eye itself was extremely bloodshot, almost completely red, with a small trail of blood following the single droplet that fell from its eye. With each creak of the rope, it would swing into view, and then disappear behind my head again. My teeth were chattering by now, and my knees quivering. It was everything I could do to keep myself standing, afraid that if I fell, the noose in front of me would be there to catch my neck and lead me to eternity. But my breaking point was the voice that suddenly invaded my ears, audible even over the seemingly deafening croak of the hangman's noose. In a voice no louder than a whisper, strained through vocal cords crushed inside a long dead throat, I heard, "Will they cut you down?" I screamed, smacking away the dreaded rope in front of me violently, and running as fast as I could to get out of the building, not even caring to lock the front door behind me. So here I am, telling you all about this. I really don't know what to do. Working for Paul and Joe has been great, and it wouldn't be fair to anyone else they hired to have to deal with whomever, or whatever, is inhabiting that place. I met Joe and Paul outside the front doors of the theater yesterday to talk in more detail about it. I thought it would be fine since the sun was shining strongly, but after a few moments of conversation, I peered through the glass front doors a quick moment while Paul was talking to me. Past the lobby, through the open doors that led to a darkened theater, next to the lonely ghost light on the stage, providing the only source of light, was a long, rotting coil of rope descending from the blackness of the rafters, a noose tied tightly at the end of it. I think I need a different job. First of all, this is true, and not just a random story. I'm genuinely scared and I don't know what to do. I'm going to try and make this short because I just want to get it out there, since I'm too scared to go back to my house tonight. So I'm currently renting a place on Airbnb. So a little backstory. I moved into this new house, and right across the street from my house is an abandoned manor. It's cliche, I know, but that's honestly what drew me to getting that house, since I've always been intrigued by abandoned places, especially ones with eerie stories. For example, this manor was passed down from within the family for years, until the last remaining family members who lived there mysteriously all disappeared at the same time in the 1900s, and it's just been abandoned ever since then. I thought that was pretty neat, at first. Things were fine, and I was really enjoying my new place. And then after a while, I was really curious about the abandoned manor. Something just made me feel like checking it out. So I managed to get inside, and within a second, the vibe just felt wrong. Can't put my finger on it, but something was off. I felt like I was being watched, so I ran back across the street to my house, while my heart was racing for no reason. I've never really believed in supernatural stuff, so that was strange for me, but I think that's when things started taking a turn for me. Whenever I would walk home late at night, I would feel like someone was still watching me from the manor across the street. Maybe I'm just paranoid now. Soon after that, I would always hear sounds within my house late at night, while in my bedroom, specifically in the kitchen and living room, but I never really thought too much about it since I'd always hear these sounds right when I was on the brink of sleep. You know when you're just about to fall asleep at any second, and you hear stuff in the background, but it almost feels like it's part of your dream? Well, it was always like that, so I could never say for sure if I actually heard something, or if it was in my dream. But why would I dream of dishes being moved, or someone walking around my home? So now fast forward to last night. I was sleeping in the living room since my bedroom can get quite hot during the summer. So I get my blankets and slept on the floor, which is something I've always loved to do even as a kid. So I got everything ready and turned off the TV, and the lights in the house. When I finally turned off the light in the living room, I got a very unsettling feeling. What was my solution? To quickly hide under my blankets and watch funny videos until the feeling went away? Yeah, I'm aware that it's pathetic. I instantly felt safe under the blankets, so I put my headphones in my ears. But I didn't plug it into my phone yet because I usually do that once I find something to watch. So I completely forgot to plug them in because I started scrolling through Instagram looking at funny memes, until I heard the voice in the corner of the living room and I froze. I honestly couldn't move or do anything. I was too scared to make any movements. I heard something say, "There's one thing you don't seem to understand," and then another voice overlapping it, saying the same sentence, but I couldn't catch the other words because the voices were overlapping each other. It would start with 1, then 2, and 3, and so on until I couldn't make sense of it anymore. The whole time while this is happening, my body is still in shock. I didn't know how to react. I can't even remember exactly what was going through my mind, but then suddenly, all the voices stopped at once. At that moment, I started gathering myself together and remember thinking, what the hell? I also wanted to kick myself for not recording it, just for my own sanity. A few hours go by and I'm still stuck in the same position. You guys, my body was so uncomfortable that I just wanted to move my leg or something, but was still too scared to do that. Right when I'm about to build courage to do it, the voices start up again, with the same build up from one voice to 2 voices at the same time and so on. There's one thing you don't seem to understand. I also was able to catch another thing it said, and it was, in this life and the next. Wish I was able to hear more, but it was so hard to understand with so many voices at once. This time I wasn't going to mess up. I made sure to record it. Very slowly, I moved my fingers to the closest app I could record on, and it was Snapchat. So I started recording a video, and once it played back, I'd be able to hear if the voices were actually there or if I was going crazy. Now once the video finishes recording, I forgot it automatically plays back, which is fine because I have my headphones in. Except I forgot to plug my headphones in, because I never ended up watching a movie, and now this video plays out loud. My heart stopped because whatever is in the corner of my living room now knows I just recorded it. The moment it played back, I quickly plugged the headphones in, and all the voices stopped at once. All I could think in my head was, they know. They know. But at least I still have a recording, and can now confirm that I'm not crazy. But I think that just made it worse, because now I know that something really is there. Now another hour goes by and I'm mortified. By the way, I still want to move my leg. It's been hours at this point. And it's gotten very hot under the blankets. Remember, it's the middle of summer, and I'm sweating. But I'll be damned if I pop my head out from under the blankets, because I don't want to see what's out there. Things start getting calm again, and I'm going to watch something funny to just make it through to the morning. But before I find anything, all the voices start up again. And instead of building up, they all go at once and they're yelling, right next to my ear. Something was on the other side of the blankets. Not even going to lie to you guys, I started crying silently. Eventually I fell asleep and got up and out of there as soon as possible. Now I don't know what to do, or what that could have been. I'll be staying at an Airbnb for tonight, but I'll have to go back tomorrow. I work in a fairly large office in the downtown part of New York. I've been there for a long time, and I can say that in all my years of working there, I had never, not once, seen anything out of the ordinary. Just a run-of-the-mill office, you know? Well, there was really only one part of the office that was different from the rest. We have a basement. That's just referred to as floor 0. It's been boarded off since the 70s, when one of the old pipes down there burst and poured toxic gas into the room, and killed everybody in there. It was flushed out, but the company decided to board it up, before they put several documents in there. Just old accounts that we probably won't need, but might need in the future. The whole thought of floor 0 just creeped me out. To get there you have to go behind a locked door behind a supply closet, and there are no lights, so you have to use a torch, and it's really big. So there could be anything in there hiding to get you. I tried my absolute best to avoid going anywhere near it. My avoiding had been going very well, until one day my manager asked me if I could go down to get some old documents. I had to do it because I was late, so I missed out on the opportunity to not go. I was late to work that day, you see. My ex-wife and I had a huge argument over my kid, and who should get to see her, so of course I was going to be a bit late. I grabbed a torch and the key, and headed down into the supply closet. It was just behind a couple of brooms that there was an old door, almost painted into the wall. I put the rusty key into the rusty lock, and fiddled with it for a bit until the door finally opened. It was hard to push the door open, considering it hadn't been used in years, but I pushed it open and got to the stairs. They were these mossy concrete slabs basically. I carefully walked down them. I could hear some cracking under my weight, and I don't weigh very much. I finally found myself at the second floor, with a poor, makeshift sign reading records. The second I entered the room, everything felt off. The room went immediately cold, and the smell filled my nose in an instant. Each step I took seemed to echo. I looked around for a bit, surveying the dark abyss that was my surroundings. I finally found the file I was looking for. I can't tell you how glad I was to finally get out of there. I ran to the door that entered the room, except it wouldn't open. I tried to open it. I tried really hard, but it wouldn't budge. The keyhole was gone as well, so I couldn't unlock it. I banged and screamed, but the door wouldn't budge, and nobody would be able to hear me. I heard a rustling noise. I turned around, but there was nothing there. But the feeling of being watched was like having something being burned into the back of my neck. I immediately began to panic. My phone had little to no service, and my puffer was running low, and I panicked very easily. I ran around the room trying to find another way out, desperately looking for some semblance of an exit. Then I heard it. A ding. I turned around and there was a flickering light that I hadn't noticed earlier. It was a really old elevator. I remembered that there was an old boarded up elevator door up in the lobby. Maybe I could get back there and call for help, I thought. I got into the elevator and sure enough, there was a button to go up to the lobby. I pushed the button without a second thought. At first it stayed still for a few seconds, before roaring to life and slowly rising. I watched floor 0 sink beneath my feet as I rose above it. As I looked across the room for the last time, I remember seeing something. A figure moving through the darkness, but it was probably just my shadow drifting upwards. The lobby. It took a while, but the elevator finally got up to the lobby. The elevator screeched to a halt, and the first set of doors opened. The cage doors, however, did not. I went up to see if I could pry it open, but nothing worked. It took me a while, but I noticed something different. The lobby was packed with people. People bustling around all over the place. Our company hadn't been that busy for years. I called out for help, but nobody seemed to hear me. Like they couldn't even see me. I noticed everyone's clothing as well. It seemed a bit dated. Like they had gone to some early 2000s party or something like that. It was then I noticed a family. A man, his wife, and their baby. They stood in the lobby talking to themselves. There was something off about this family. The man, who appeared to be the husband, wore a very tattered and torn suit. He stood there talking to his wife, who looked fairly dirty, before he kissed her, and his child, and turned around. The man was me. I don't know how, but it was me. Me from a few years ago. I realized that I remembered this day. It was the day I applied for the job. I hadn't remembered this day before, like I had blocked it from my memory, but seeing it happen in front of me brought it back. That's when it hit me. On that day, I went into floor 0. I had to get a file that day. I can't remember anything else that had happened. I can't even remember that happening, but I know it did. I watched me approach the elevator before he pushed a button. The cage doors opened and he walked in. He nodded his head at me and began to talk. I was in such a state that I could barely listen, let alone respond. He talked about how he was excited for his life and what was to come. That was all I remember. Floor 1. We reached floor 1, the door slid open, and the younger me stepped out. I recognized this place to be my apartment block. The hallway outside my apartment stretched out before my eyes. Young me tipped his hat to me and walked over to his apartment and knocked on the door. My wife opened the door and I whispered something to her before she pulled him into a tight hug. It was a fond memory. I stepped into the apartment as the elevator went up again. Floor 2. At floor 2 I was in my office. It seemed to be a few years later than floor 1. I could see the date on a calendar. It was an older and, I'll admit, fatter me. I remembered this part well, unfortunately. I had been working for hours and hours. There were bags under my eyes. I looked like death. The phone rang. This is where everything went south for every single version of me that I've seen so far. This day was our daughter's birthday, and I decided not to go because I was too tired. I watched the younger me tell my wife this. I felt disgusted even myself. "Go to her birthday, you idiot!" I screamed at me, but he couldn't hear. The elevator went up again. Floor 3, 4, and 5. I watched myself enter the bar. I walked in. I had to wait for hours. Before I walked out again, completely drunk. I went up again. It was the same situation, but a different day. Up again. Same shit, different day. Shame crept all over me like a lion ready to pounce a gazelle. I knew what was next. Floor 6. It was my daughter's birthday. She had just turned 4. I waited for a bit. I was on the floor of the dusty elevator, my head in my hands. I didn't want to watch. I heard drunken me storm into the apartment, my wife screaming, my daughter crying, and me yelling. I know what I did was wrong, and I spend every single day of my life regretting it. I heard my daughter scream. There was a bang. "Her arm, you drunk idiot! Your daughter! You monster!" The elevator doors closed. All I could hear was my fist connecting my wife's face. Floor 7. I didn't even want to watch anymore. It was the police interrogating me about beating my wife. Even remembering it was bad, but having to watch it was worse. Floor 8. The judge ruled me an unfit parent to my daughter. I could feel the entire weight of everything I'd ever done weighing down on my shoulders. Like all my past selves were sitting on my head. I'd already broken down completely. My eyes stung from the crying. I deserve what I got. Floor 9. It was a pitch black room. From the darkness stepped every past version of myself. They all stepped into the elevator with me. None of them said a word. They all just stared at me, not even breaking eye contact. Floor 10. It was the final version of me. Many years older than myself, curled up in a ball, skinny as a bone, shivering from the cold. Trapped between file cabinets, it was floor 0, and I realized I'd earned it. My hell, my punishment for everything I did, to my family, to my daughter, to myself. Floor 0. The elevator opened and so did the cage doors. I stepped off. I turned to take a last look at my past selves, but they were gone, back to where they belonged. I looked around the empty abyss of floor 0, my resting place. I walked away from the lift. I could hear somebody screaming. I ran towards the sound and there it was. Me once again, banging on the locked-in door. I let out a gasp. He turned around. He looked terrified. I ducked out of view. I watched as he turned and walked towards the elevator, which just let out a ding. He climbed in. I watched him rise up and out of floor 0. The same journey I experienced. He floated above like a Christ figure, and I could have sworn that he saw me. I walked around the room for a bit, until finally my phone got service. I would have called the police to make my escape, but I chose not to. I decided to write this post, not to redeem myself, but to explain and to apologize, and to warn. To my loving wife, I cannot express to you just how truly sorry I am. You had always been there for me, even in my darkest hours, and then when you needed me most, I shut you out, and tore our family apart with my bare, drunken hands. To my beautiful daughter, I know you'll probably never see me again and you won't want to, and that's okay. I wouldn't want to either. But I hope you know, wherever you are, that I love you. I know you'll grow into a strong woman, just like your mother. Please never lose your hope. I love you. And to all those reading this that I never met, I want to say, for you all to treasure your life, and to never give up like I did. We've only got one life, don't waste it away. And when you find that one beautiful thing we call family, don't let it go. Hold it close to your heart forever, and always. I'm sorry everything had to turn out this way, but I'm afraid it did. And I'm glad it did. This is what I deserve. Goodbye. What follows is a retelling of events that took place over 3 months ago. I can tell my mind is slipping, and it's hard to type correctly. I've had to rewrite this sentence a few times already, but this story needs to be told, as a warning to any who read it, or find themselves in a similar situation as I did all those months ago. It all started when I left my girlfriend's house on a humid April night. The dark, barren road stretched out before me, seemingly never ending as the pavement rolled under my car like an endless loop. Trees and fields lined each side of the road, just out of my headlight's reach. The moon was full, shining brightly on the dark earth and illuminating everything in a slight blue shimmer. Honestly, I could probably turn my headlights off and drive perfectly fine once my eyes adjusted to the minimal light. These were the thoughts that roamed my mind every time I left my girlfriend's house. Her parents' house was out in the middle of bumfuck nowhere, and I usually left late into the night so I could spend the most possible time with her. The only real thing to be afraid of out here was a deer and the occasional stray cat, but my mind still connected all sorts of mysterious and horrific things that could be lurking in the darkness. It didn't help that I was listening to a horror story podcast as I drove either. Naturally, I was freaked out, but I did my best to think about the great nights I'd had with my girlfriend. It wasn't much. We just cuddled on the couch in her basement, ate mac and cheese, and finally got around to watching Stranger Things. It was such a good show, and watching it with her made it a million times better. We watched the entire first season, start to finish, by the time I'd left. We were both excited to start season 2 when we next met, but also sad that it would be over a week before then. It's worth mentioning we were both seniors in high school at the time, so school and jobs often made it difficult to find time to spend together, and the time always went by far too quickly when we managed to find some. My train of thought and my car both came to a screeching halt as I slammed on the brakes. When I finally came to a stop, I took a moment to snap back to reality as my focus came back to the present. The thing that had caused me to stop was a dying deer in the middle of the road. I'm not sure how I had seen it, nor how my legs had slammed the brakes purely on instinct. Regardless, the poor thing was barely alive, its chest rising and falling with panicked breaths as its head rolled back to look at my car. It was covered in blood but had no wounds that I could see. Thoughts whizzed through my mind as I tried to understand what was happening. Maybe the animal had been hit by a car, but that didn't seem likely, as there was no other car around or evidence of a crash. Plus the deer was in the dead center of the road, almost like it had been placed there. Unless there was someone out here doing some illegal hunting in the night, there's no other rational explanation to why this deer was here. Flashes of light from the field to my right suddenly pulled my attention away from the animal. Bright beams of light quickly shone through my windows, blinding me. I held my hand to cover my eyes and quickly turned left, but found that there were lights on my left also. Peeking between my fingers, I realized there were many light sources, at least 10 plus on each side of my car, and they were getting closer. Panic set in, and I swiftly pulled my car into reverse. I slammed the gas pedal and flew back away from the deer and lights. When I was about 100 feet away from the scene, another set of headlights appeared out from the trees behind me. For a second, I thought it was a cop and felt relieved. I slowed my car to a stop, and the other car did the same behind me. The relief that had previously washed over my body instantly froze, as I realized the car was not a cop. 6 men piled out of the vehicle, shining more flashlights into my retinas. I shifted into drive and pushed the gas again. My only option now was to try and swerve past the deer and away from the men, so I did just that. With blazing speed, I came upon the deer and men in the field once more. The people tried to swarm my car, but I was too fast. I sped around the deer and quickly left the men behind. They stood in the middle of the road, just behind the deer, and watched me go. Relief once again rolled over me as the adrenaline began to seep out of my veins. I breathed deeply, trying to calm my aggressively beating heart. I had made it. I had escaped the mysterious men. In my panic, however, I hadn't noticed the podcast had started skipping. I picked up my phone, trying to turn the story off, but it stopped on its own as I lost connection. Looking at the top of the screen, I noticed there were no bars and the words, "No service," shown in bold text next to the empty bars. My first thought was that the people were somehow jamming my phone signal in an attempt to keep me from calling for help, but that's when I noticed the snowflakes accumulating on my windshield. I turned my wipers on, and the thick flakes slid away, revealing a very different world. Despite the fact that it was the middle of April, around 8 inches of snow blanketed the ground, even on the road. My car began to lose traction, so I pressed the brakes and gripped the steering wheel tightly. The car then fishtailed fiercely, and I lost control. My car flew off the road and slammed into a ditch. Thankfully, I wore a seatbelt, but that didn't stop the severe whiplash I'd felt when coming to a sudden stop from at least 50 miles per hour. I leaned back in my seat and held my head, which was pounding with pain now. My vision was blurry and doubled, but quickly came back to focus after a few moments. I turned the car off and checked my phone again. Still no service. With little choice, I opened the door and stumbled out of the ditch and onto the road. That's when I realized my nose was bleeding severely. I felt a thick, warm liquid flowing freely down my face, the metallic taste infesting my mouth. I spit it out onto the snow and noticed another thing was off. The light of the moon, which had shown a brilliant blue before, was now a crimson color. I looked up to get a good look at it, and sure enough, the celestial object was also shining the shade of red. More blood filled my mouth, so I looked back down to spit it out and began to shiver. It had been a scorching hot summer only 5 minutes ago, so I was wearing just a t-shirt, shorts, and my usual sneakers. With snow up to my ankles, and a strong wind billowing over the open fields I stood between, I quickly began to freeze. Going over my options, I remember that I kept a throw blanket in the backseat of my car, so my girlfriend could wrap herself up in it when she got cold. It didn't get used much outside of winter or fall, but I was always too lazy to take it out of my car. Thankful for my laziness, I went to the vehicle and opened the back door. I felt the soft fabric of the blanket and pulled it out. It wouldn't do much, but it was something. Rustling in the grass on the opposite side of my car made me freeze. I slowly picked my head up and looked out the passenger side window. There, peering through the glass, was something that resembled a person. The being that leaned in and peeked through the window at me looked human, but only without skin. The exposed muscles and tendons almost made me vomit. If my fear hadn't kept it down, I knew the creature was staring at me, despite the fact that its eyes were rolled back into its skull and its expression was blank. As soon as I'd felt its gaze upon me and recognized it, its eyes rolled down into a normal position, and its mouth curled up into a wide, cartoonish smile that stretched up to the base of its ears. Pure joy radiated off the thing, but it was partnered with a malevolence that chilled me to my core. It then continued to stare at me with its petrifying face, before speaking a single word.
Hi.
Its voice was deep and demonic, but also with a slight echo effect, almost like two voices speaking at once. Before I could react, the thing had crawled onto the roof of my car. Without thinking, I jumped into the back seat and pulled the door closed behind me with my foot. The automatic lock clicked into place as the creature's head slowly slid into view from the top of the window frame, its facial expression not changing in the slightest. It repeated the greeting and slowly winded a fist up, bringing it down quickly onto the window, shattering it. I screamed as the glass flew into the car, and a wet hand gripped my left ankle tightly. I kicked my leg ferociously, but the steel grip on my leg didn't loosen in the slightest. After a moment, I suddenly felt a shooting pain come from my left hip, and weightlessness as I flew through the air. I landed hard on snow-covered pavement, causing all the air in my lungs to come out in a wheeze. I got myself to my hands and knees and heaved heavily. My limbs began to go numb, which subdued the piercing pain that shot up from my left leg. I guessed it was dislocated based on what the creature had done to me. I looked over my shoulder back at my car and saw the monstrosity on the roof. It was in an unnatural spider-like position, its limbs jutting straight out from its body and bent perfectly 90 degrees at the joints. It still stared at me, its facial expression not changing.
Run.
It said. Not needing to be told twice, I got to my feet. My left leg protested numbly, but my adrenaline-fueled panic kept me going. I sprinted as quickly as I could despite my injury back toward where I had escaped the mysterious men before. I don't know how far I had gone since then, but I thought that if I could get to them, they could help me. I was about 50 yards away from my wrecked car when I heard the creature screech a blood-curdling scream. I looked over my shoulder to see the monster leap off the car and begin scuttling towards me at an ungodly speed. Its eyes had rolled back into its skull, and its head lolled wildly as a burst of hysterical laughter came from it. My fear pushed me harder as I broke into a full-on sprint, ignoring the protests from my leg. I screamed and ran as I heard the monster getting closer and closer with each passing second. My mind raced and my legs pumped harder than they ever had, but it wasn't enough. The creature tackled me into the snow and continued to laugh hysterically. I tried to roll onto my back, but it held me down onto my stomach. I continued to scream until all the air had left my lungs. My yells for help slowly turned into a whisper as my throat burned and my vocal cords felt like they'd torn. Once I stopped screaming, the creature stopped laughing. I turned my head to look up at it, only to see it staring down on me.
Wake.
It said, before hitting me hard in the face. When I came to, I was laying in my bed at my house. My alarm was blaring for me to wake up, so I turned it off. I moved my left leg slowly and found that there was no pain whatsoever. I then moved to my bathroom carefully and found no other wounds on my body or face. I sat on my toilet and put my head in my hands to think about what had happened, and at the time, I thought it was all just a terrible dream I'd had after getting home the night before. That was 3 months ago, and for those few months, I've lived my life as normally as ever. I'd forgotten about the dream after a while, but now I know that it wasn't just a dream. For the last week, I felt unbelievably sick, with a fever in the hundreds for days straight. My girlfriend went on vacation with her family about 2 days ago, and I'm thankful she's not here, because when I woke up this morning and went to brush my teeth, I noticed a large piece of skin missing from just below my left eye. The exposed muscles and tendons not hurting in the slightest. But since then my skin has felt heavy and wet, like I'm just swimming in a full sweatsuit. I've begun to scratch it off fiercely, peeling it off in chunks, and I can feel my mind slipping farther as I finish typing this. The skin on my fingertips is flaking off in bloody globs all over my keyboard. I don't know if I'll be able to escape my town before I fully turn, but I'm going to try as soon as this is posted. Wish me luck. The closet has never been open in my lifetime, the one at the end of the hallway. It was bolted shut, wooden planks hazardly nailed to the edges, the aforementioned nails covered in rust and grime, the bottom gap covered and stuffed with multiple towels, many of which were thick, dense enough to keep whatever was inside from escaping. It was a white door, a simple one, from what I could tell. No scratches, no marks, only a chip near the handle. My parents urged me to never go to that end of the manor. They had all belongings transferred over to other wings, but only that one remained barren and cold. It was always cold there. We inherited our manor when my great-grandmother died. I never really liked her. She always had an insane, dead look in her eyes. She would never speak, never come to visit, never move. Last I saw of her, she resided in the West Wing, in an old, creaky room with terrible black wallpaper. My parents never let me go near the East Wing, especially my mother. My father defended me when I got too close, but after a talk with my mother, he got tight-lipped. I remember as a child asking why we weren't allowed to go into the East Wing when we visited my great-grandmother. I remember her saying the closet held a secret staircase, and that if you follow that staircase, there's a room. In that room lies a frozen block of ice. If you get too close, you'll freeze to death. At the time, it seemed like a scary children's story, but I was too scared to even think of going down there. It had been years before I was ready to confront it. I escaped from my bed, my phone's flashlight on, as I made my way into the East Wing. The maternal side of my family always had a really high body temperature. It sounds rather odd to say, but we always were so warm. It sometimes felt like we were burning. In the summertime, it was the worst, and the winter was a blazing in disguise for us. However, when I walked near the East Wing, all of that warmth seemed to drain, slowly, gradually. It wasn't like I was shivering or getting goosebumps. It felt like I was thread on a bobbin, and someone was pulling the thread away from me. There was something that felt very peculiar, and for my sanity, I couldn't put my finger on it. The door got closer. I grew colder. It seemed almost as if it were moving to me on its own, but I knew that it had to be nonsense. Finally, I was in front of the door, my metal phone case nearly frostbitingly cold. The nails of the door were not that difficult to pry off. The wooden bars had long since molded and rotted. It was difficult to do so silently, however, and I knew that there was a high chance that my parents would wake up to the noise, even if they were on the other side of the manor. I unrolled the towels at the bottom of the door. The moldy, crusty towels disguised me rightfully so. There were many stuck down there, whatever that room is. There probably was no light. I pulled out 8 of them. What were my parents trying to hide? There was a small latch on the door, an insignificant latch. I opened it and immeasurably pulled my hand away, as I felt the most biting feeling I've ever felt in my life. The metal was freezing. Now that I looked at it, it was frosted over. I took one of the towels to the handle of the doorknob and twisted it open, the cold pricking me even from the covered surface. Slowly I opened the door, and cringed as it made the most loud creak as I did so. The stairs were front and center, the wooden steps leading only downwards, not up. It was smaller than I imagined, and I had to duck as I entered. Surprisingly, the steps were in good shape. No rotting, no creaking. It almost concerned me. Why? If this place hadn't been opened in possibly centuries, had these stairs remained unscathed? The cold distracted me from completing the thought. It was positively freezing here, my hands shaking as I gripped my phone. I left the door open, as there was no inner door handle, and I wasn't stupid. As I'm going down the stairs, however, I did prove myself wrong and made a stupid decision. I tried to remove my phone's metal casing as it was stinging my hands, but dropped it in the process. I stared as the phone tumbled down the stairs until it slid at the bottom, the flashlight flickering, then shutting off. Without the phone, everything seemed dark. I wanted to discontinue, go back upstairs, close the door and tell my parents, but I saw a blue light at the end of the staircase. It was so faint. It seemed to be coming from a room far away from it. I made my way down the steps, holding the railing as I went, my breath becoming quicker, my hands shaky. I was feeling drained, like I lost everything, and I followed the light like it was the only thing that could help. I traveled all the way down, step by step by step, circling the blue light. It was my only focus. I finally stopped as I realized there were no more steps to climb down. I looked around and realized that I was at the end of a hallway with black wallpaper. At the end of this hallway was a faint blue light. It was closer now. I picked up my phone and headed towards the light. I walked at first, but it seemed so far away. I started to speed walk, then jog, and eventually run. It was getting closer minute by minute, until I finally reached it. It was a small gray room, with gray carpet which felt stiff under my feet, and stark gray wallpaper, with no designs except what looked like old, thin, unrecognizable script drawn into it. The blue light? It was a single light bulb with a sky blue hue emitting from it. Close up, it burned so dimply, slightly flickering. While looking at it, I noticed my breath fog in front of me. I looked down at my hands. I couldn't feel them anymore. I couldn't feel much of myself in general. It stung to blink, my tears turning to ice as they came out. No, I didn't want this. I had to get out of there immediately. I heard a loud thud and frantic footsteps going up the stairs. They were quick, loud, the thump of each step reaching my ears as it climbed higher and higher and higher. Finally, the door shuts with a singular thud and the faint sound of a lock. I couldn't believe it. I stared at the endless showdown hallway in disbelief slowly, painstakingly. I turned to the light bulb. Right next to it was broken cobbles of ice.